Good to see everybody here. We appreciate you coming to Eckstein Hall, Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Goucher. I'm a distinguished fellow in law and public policy at Marquette University Law School. I'll be moderating one of the discussions at today's event. Alan Borsick, my colleague, will be here to give you the lay of the land here in just a moment. But I wanted to take just a second to welcome everyone to this beautiful building and to the law school, and just to take about 30 seconds or so to tell you why we do events like this. This law school believes strongly that we should act as a public square for this community. We believe that this should be a place for important civil conversations, and this will be one of them today. We do a lot of different things here at the law school. We do political debates. We do the Marquette Law School poll, which I think has been the most accurate barometer of public opinion in this state over the last couple of years. We do symposia, conferences on topics that are of interest to people in this community and in this region. We want to make a difference, and we want to be forward-looking and not have the same old conversations over and over again. We'd like to look for solutions and like to talk to people about what's working elsewhere, as in today's event, and how it might be applied to some of the challenges we face as a community. So having said that, we are delighted that you are here. I send my best from our Dean, Joe Kearney, who is in another meeting at this hour, but will be joining us a bit later. And I'll turn it over to Alan Borsick, who will describe today's event for us. Alan?
This, I should add, this is actually co-sponsored by the Law School and the College of Education, and Dean Bill Hank, who's sitting right in front of me here, is also going to be one of the participants. Funny thing happened on the way to finalizing the program here. Last night, I picked up both Mike Casterly and Paul Hill at the airport. Even though they were coming from the opposite ends of the country, they arrived within about 8 minutes of each other. And Mike Casterly said to me, "How come we're not talking together, the two of them?" And I said, "I don't know. We just sort of set it up with two separate sessions, and you got one point of view, and Paul has a different point of view on some issues and not on some issues." So we redid it at the last moment here, and this part of the program, Mike Casterly, who is the head of the Council of the Great City Schools, and Mike Goucher will be talking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll switch over to Paul Hill for about 40 minutes with me. I do wonder what kind of idiot succeeds Mike Goucher moderating a conversation, but nonetheless, I'm going to do it. And then both of them are going to be here, and we'll take questions from you along the way. We have here today in the audience, and this is my thanks to each of you, a really quite impressive array of the significant figures in the education scene in Milwaukee and beyond, and we're very eager to have you here. Following the sessions with Mike Casterly and Paul Hill, we'll take a 15-minute break, and we have an excellent panel discussion. Dean Hank will be moderating with four people who each have powerful and strong views and intelligent views on different aspects of what Milwaukee might do. The whole subject is, in my opinion, that we're at a point here, we got to pick a new superintendent for MPS, we've got the continuing huge issues we face, both the legislature and the Milwaukee School Board have been dealing with what to do about low-performing schools, and I'm not sure how much progress we're really making in either of those arenas. And my hope in putting this program together was to bring in people who could shed some light on what's going on elsewhere in the country, what is being done in some places that are seeing faster progress than average, what we in Milwaukee might learn in how to focus more and maximize our work more around actually moving kids forward. So the whole question is, what can we learn from elsewhere? Lessons from elsewhere is what we call the conference. That said, take it away.
All right, Alan, thanks very much. We'd like to welcome Mike Casterly, to this event today and to show you what a small world the world of education is. Mike and I were talking earlier. My dad knows Mike from when my dad was a big city school superintendent here in Milwaukee back in the late 60s and early 70s.
Now, this is starting to really date me.
Mike was 11 when he started with the Council of... but we want to spend a little time today talking about what's working elsewhere and why some districts in this country are seeing improvement and they're seeing better performance on various tests. And I thought, Mike, we might begin the discussion today by providing some framework. And I think there's, you hear this as someone who's an advocate for public schools, a believer in public schools. You will hear from time to time people in the urban education debate say, you know, big city school systems are hopelessly broken, that they just don't work anymore, and we have to look at doing things differently. You say the data suggests there's a different story emerging. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I am really far more optimistic than a lot of people might guess. I've been the head of the Council of the Great City Schools now for the better part of 23 years, and I've been associated with urban public education for nearly 40 years now. And I have to say I am probably more optimistic now about our chances of success and the progress that we are making than I have ever been before. And my optimism is really grows from the fact that not only are we making improvements, which I'll say more about in a minute, but because we're figuring out why we're making improvements and what it's likely to take to get more. So I think the evidence over the last 10 years or so, particularly on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which Milwaukee has participated in over the last several testing cycles, suggests that urban public school districts across the country are not only improving in reading and mathematics, but are improving at a rate that is far faster than national averages. Now, we are still behind. I don't want to be Pollyannish about that. We have a long way to go. But the fact that we are making such large gains, and in some places the gains are really substantial and present some opportunities by which we can learn from those. So I know the public perception of urban schools is often that we are kind of a hopeless basket case, unable to improve. We're stuck in the status quo. But the truth of the matter is, across the country, urban public schools are often the sites of some of the most interesting reforms and important innovations that are going on any place in public education in the nation.
Let's talk, Mike, for a moment about cities where we're seeing progress, cities where test scores for 4th and 8th graders in reading and math are improving. Where's the progress being made?
Well, again, you'll see progress in large city schools uniformly better than the progress that you see nationwide on the national assessment, but cities that have shown kind of unusual progress in reading and mathematics, and I'm going to rely here mostly on the evidence from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. There's lots of other evidence, but that's the only achievement test scores that we really have by which you can compare performance across state lines. And one of the things that our organization did a few years ago was to take a look at what cities seemed to be making the most progress, what cities were making some of the least progress, and what was the difference in the instructional programs and other features of those school districts that kind of differentiated why one was making headway and the other set was not. But cities that were making substantial progress in the initial period that we studied between 2002, 2003, all the way up to 2009, included school districts like Boston, particularly in mathematics. And Boston's a really interesting case we can talk more about in a minute, because it's one of the only urban school districts that, at least in mathematics, at the 8th grade level, despite having a poverty rate almost twice the national average, on 8th grade mathematics, they've actually caught the national average, which is really an amazing feat for a school district with a poverty rate that it does. Atlanta has made really substantial headway in reading and literacy. Now, forget for a second what you think you know about Atlanta in terms of the cheating scandal and all of that. And there was clearly some of that going on the state tests. But on the national assessment, it clearly showed that there were substantial reforms in Atlanta, and that the reforms really made a difference in the improvements that that city was getting in achievement. Since 2009, we've also, while we haven't formally studied it, we've seen substantial improvements in the District of Columbia Public Schools, in Los Angeles, both in reading and mathematics. And while Boston has started to fade a little bit in its improvements in mathematics, Atlanta continues to improve not only in reading but now in mathematics too. So places like Boston and Atlanta and DC and Los Angeles, probably Long Beach and Denver as well, although they don't take the national assessment, are places that are seeing some really outsized gains despite having many of the same challenges that a place like Milwaukee has. And let me be perfectly clear and honest with the audience, is that we haven't done any in-depth studies of Milwaukee in some time. So many of the things that other urban school districts do may be going on right here in Milwaukee, but we haven't devoted the kind of on-the-ground time that we would have needed to answer some of the Milwaukee-specific questions.
You know, each district is unique, but I would imagine what you're looking for when we talk about urban education success is you're looking for common features in these districts. Do they exist in the districts you just named?
They do, and one of the things that we tried to do was to not only figure out what was common across the districts that were showing improvement in reading and mathematics on the national assessment, but what was different about those characteristics from districts that were showing no improvement on the national assessment of educational progress, because it's pretty clear to us that just looking at the commonalities on the success side don't mean as much unless you have a counterfactual on the non-improving side to see whether or not you're really looking at the right things. In that regard, we took a look at Cleveland, which is very similar to Milwaukee in many respects. The demographics are similar. It has the same kind of portfolio of schools, lots of charters, voucher schools, and the like. And it's a school district that has shown no improvement whatsoever. Milwaukee has, by the way, shown some gains over the last several years, particularly on the national assessment. But we did take a look at school districts that showed no progress at all. Common features, or things that really distinguished these two sets of districts, included a number of elements. Districts that were showing substantial improvement on the national assessment on reading and mathematics. One had a leadership component made of the superintendent and the Board of Education that were unified in their overall reform approach. They agreed on their theory of action. Their theory of action was built around improving the academic attainment of their kids. They worked hand in glove over a sustained period of time in order to make that happen. So that was common feature number one. In school districts that haven't made as much progress, including Cleveland, we didn't find that to the same degree. Also, the school districts that were showing improvement were very explicit about the goals that they were setting. They didn't have to be explicit numerical goals. They didn't have to be mechanical, but they had to have some well-defined goals that were set for the school district that were clear and transparent to the public, and by which they held people accountable for the results. Now, it didn't have to be accountability that, again, was mechanical or was based just around test scores and the like, but there had to be some way in which people were held responsible for the academic growth of the kids that they were teaching. The third thing that was really common about these faster improving school districts, and to set them aside from school districts that didn't make as much headway, was the nature of the curriculum and the instructional program itself. The nature of the program, what textbooks you bought, what those kinds of things didn't matter so much. As a matter of fact, you can't buy a program that will be your salvation in any of these urban school districts. But typically the curriculum was well articulated from grade to grade. It was highly rigorous. For low achieving students, it had both a component that was fairly strict in its teaching of like phonics and those kinds of things at the reading level, but it stretched the kids well beyond that in terms of comprehension and synthesis of concepts and all of that. But the curriculum itself was well articulated, rigorous, and aligned to the standards that were being set. In addition to that, the professional development and other mechanisms by which the capacity of the staff, that is teaching staff, principals, central office folks and the like, really was built around the instructional goals. It was built around the curriculum, and it improved the capacity of the staff to actually improve instructional attainment of the kids. It wasn't misaligned. It wasn't about miscellaneous procedures and rules and regulations. As necessary as some of that stuff is, the professional development was really designed to build the capacity of people around instructional improvement. These kind of system-wide strategies that I'm describing were sometimes accompanied by strategies that honed in on individual schools that are sometimes immune to a larger system-wide set of strategies. So there's kind of a turnaround component in individual schools that are just chronically failing and are otherwise kind of immune to the system-wide reforms that are going on. And then all of these things were kind of backed up by a careful use of data, and not data that was used for a gotcha purpose, right, but data that was used to inform instruction. So all in all, Mike, there was both a strategic component around the board, the superintendent, the goals and accountability that kind of defined the theory of action, that theory of action being focused on instruction, and then a set of tactical reforms that were more oriented towards the curriculum, how it was implemented, how data was used to inform progress and the like.
Let me pursue this first point. You talked about consistent, sustained leadership. Based on what you've seen around the country, can you have a district achieve the sort of progress that we would all want when you have something that does not resemble consistent, sustained leadership? Is it possible?
I think it's much, much harder. And I think maybe you can get gains over a short period of time, but I think it's harder to get gains over a longer period of time and to sustain those gains. It's really critical that the leadership of a school district be united. That doesn't mean that they can't have differences of opinions about things, but there be some broad-based strategic agreement about the theory of action, how you're going to pursue it, what the roles of everybody are going to be in that process, that there is clear transparency, and that it's, again, continued over a long period of time. Now, that said, I've seen lots of places where people were kind of uniform or unified around their relations with one another and sustained those relations over a long period of time and got no gains whatsoever. The difference is that they were sometimes they sustained their relationship and they stayed in their positions over a long period of time, but their work wasn't actually oriented around improving the academic attainment of the kids. So you can have longevity, but you can also have longevity that doesn't amount to anything. So it's the unity of purpose and how that purpose is enlisted on behalf of the academic attainment of the kids that really matters.
You mentioned Boston, and I thought we'd spend just a minute or two on Boston because it is an interesting case study. I mean, you had a mayor, Tom Menino, who was there for 20 years, who said pretty early on in his administration, education, improving our schools is going to be one of my highest priorities. Hold me to that. You had superintendents like Tom Payzant was there for more than a decade. I think his successor was there for
5 years.
Yeah, it's been there 6 or 7 years. So you had that sort of consistency, but they also have something that's a little different than some districts where you have the mayor having a greater say in who sits on the board or who the superintendent is.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I get asked this a lot. Menino did a fabulous job in Boston. I think there was no doubt about it. He was an education mayor par excellence, and he was a critical component in the ability of the school committee and Tom Payzant and Carol Johnson, who is Tom's successor. He was a critical component in their ability to succeed. Part of what I'm referring to is that in Boston's case, this ability of the leadership to work in tandem with one another around a single goal to raise academic achievement was shared by the mayor, the school committee that he appointed, and the superintendent. Now, it raises the question, does that mean we should go to a mayoral appointed and a mayoral run system? The answer is kind of complicated because not necessarily. Again, what made Boston successful was not that they had a mayoral appointed school board, but that the leadership was all working together over a long period of time around the academic attainment of the kids. You can have a mayoral appointed board like you do in places like Chicago and Philadelphia and other cities, Richmond, and discover you're not making progress at all, in part because people aren't necessarily on the same page with one another. And it's that unity of purpose over a long period of time that really makes the difference, not who appoints whom. Now, there are some circumstances where I've come to believe that if a school board has gotten itself into a position where it's become so dysfunctional that it can't get out of its own way, then sometimes having the mayor appoint a board makes some real sense as a way of trying to develop some consensus. But sometimes you'll find over the long run, a mayoral appointed system results in a school board that acts just like a regular elected school board. So the magic here is not who appoints who. The magic is what the people do when they're in the positions and how it is they relate to one another and over what.
You said you have not done any specific work with Milwaukee for 7 or 8 years or something like that. So it would probably be wrong of me to ask you for advice for this district at a crucial moment in its history as we look for a new superintendent, as we contemplate the future. Does the advice consist of going back to the common features that you described earlier, if you were to offer any?
Well, I think I'd be hard-pressed to offer Milwaukee any specific advice until I'd spent some more time looking at what it's done or not done over the last several years. What I do think is illustrative is looking at some of these districts that have shown some really outsized improvements over the last 10 years and seeing whether or not there's any lessons to be drawn from their work.
We are, I don't know, I was going to use the word impatient, but I'm not sure we're impatient. But this takes time, does it not? I mean, you know, you talked about Cleveland. Cleveland has instituted some reforms, and yet progress has been very slow. To see meaningful progress, are we going to have to remain patient?
Well, impatiently patient. I think patience is important. This improvement of all of these school districts that have shown substantial gains over the years, their work didn't happen overnight. It took some time. As a matter of fact, in a place like Boston, and even in Atlanta, they went through an initial period where there were almost no improvements whatsoever, and there were lots of questions about whether or not we were on the right track. Are we doing the right thing? Should we rethink this? Should we throw everything out? But they were convinced, based on the early research that they were getting, the early progress that they were getting in some of their beta sites, that they were doing the right thing. And sure enough, over time, they really started to see some substantial headway. And it was a good lesson to us that maintaining some forward momentum once you start to realize it is really important. And so many urban school districts will often cut short their reforms just at the point they are starting to work because people have gotten too impatient. So you want to be a little impatient because you don't want to be satisfied at all with the status quo. We're behind. We need to catch up. Our achievement is way too low, and we need to improve it. So we need to be impatient about that, but we can't keep swapping out our leadership all the time. We can't keep changing up our theory of action all the time and expecting that we're going to get long-term progress. We're just not.
That is a great danger, isn't it? I mean, it's where it becomes almost you hate to say this, but almost a flavor of the month approach to education. Every 2 or 3 years, we change the game.
And I have to say, as urban school districts, we're terrific at this. I remember Jesse Jackson one time saying to me, you know, you guys are like the classic example of my phrase, keep hope alive, because you keep hope alive by just changing everybody. You change the people, you change the books, you change the theory of action, you change the strategies that you use. Did it ever occur to you that all of this change is actually becoming counterproductive? Because you can't get any momentum behind your reforms. So being impatiently patient.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a larger question. What realistically can we expect down the road from big city school systems? Can we expect our kids in places like Milwaukee, in places like Los Angeles, Charlotte, Washington, will they achieve at the same rates in reading and in math as kids in other parts of the country? Is that a realistic expectation?
You betcha. Now, it doesn't mean that the hurdles that we have to overcome aren't greater. I mean, the research is still very consistent and longstanding that issues of poverty and language and other issues continue to present hurdles and challenges to us that they don't necessarily present to other kinds of school districts. But just because a kid is poor doesn't mean that kid can't learn. What it means is that we have to do things differently. more intensely, maybe over longer periods of time, to make sure that our kids attain at the levels that all other kids across the country attain. And this, frankly, is one of the reasons why urban schools, including Milwaukee, are such big proponents of the Common Core state standards. Now, I probably raising an issue that lots of people would have lots of different feelings about. But one of the reasons that urban school districts across the country have been so adamant in their support of the Common Core is that it set very high standards, and it set high standards for everybody, no matter what their background. Because we were convinced in working with urban kids over all of these decades that our kids can learn just like everybody else's kids can learn, and they can learn at the same high levels. We just need to teach them to the high standards.
I want to, since we have a lot of interested people in this room, I'm going to allow a little bit more time for questions from you, because many of you are in the day-to-day of this, and I thought it would be fair, since you've taken the time to join us, to take some of your questions. So to do that, what I'd like to have you do is just raise your hand. For the people in the seating bowl, you can see there are microphones in front of you. Don't press down on the ball, press down on the rim next to the ball. And then we'll all be able to hear you. Otherwise, Ryan, the gentleman back there in the back of the room, has a microphone with him, and we can all hear your questions. So just raise your hand, and we'll take a few questions for Mike Casserly.
Yeah, at some point, too, I kind of want to weave in the lessons that we've learned from Cleveland. So if there's a question that comes up that I might be able to weave in some of the lessons from Cleveland.
I can ask you that. Would you like to tell us about the lessons from Cleveland? We can make this really simple. Before we take the audience questions, go ahead and tell us the lessons from Cleveland.
That's great. One of the things, again, that we were trying to do was to look not only districts that made a lot of progress, really outsized progress, but districts that have made kind of no headway at all. And by the way, Milwaukee is not one of those places that have made no headway. You have made some gains over the years. Your indicators are generally pointing in the right direction. Cleveland and a couple of other places are places where we've seen no academic gains on the national assessment whatsoever. Cleveland was really an interesting place. It has some lessons for us across urban education. This and part of what we were taught was that there's probably lots of ways to do this thing right, and probably lots of ways to screw this up. Cleveland presented a couple of ways in which you can screw this up. Cleveland was one of those school districts where the instructional program was not well defined. The leadership before it got its new board was very fractured and fought with each other in the administration a great deal. It was also a school district that had a lot of corruption in it historically, something that has not been there now for some time. It also had no capacity at the central office level to help its schools with its instructional program. It did not actually have a curriculum at all. Its professional development was completely incoherent and was not tied to their instructional program, such as it was. They had no interventions by which they were able to catch the kids up once they were behind. When they started going through lots of budget cuts, they were a school district that when they cut staff, particularly at the classroom level, they were cutting their younger teachers first, and the more senior teachers were being bumped into classes and subjects that they had not taught before or had not taught in a long time. So the kids were being taught by teachers that weren't prepared, and the central office had no capacity through any professional development to raise the capacity of the individual classroom teachers up, and it was kind of a death spiral for Cleveland in many ways, in that they could never get any traction under anything they did because the instructional program was so incoherent. The politics was so fractured, and the mechanisms by which they tried to boost the capacity of their staff was so weak.
And I think I read they're now trying to address some of these.
They are trying to address some of those now. They've got a terrific school board, a terrific superintendent. They're all working in tandem together. They've redefined their instructional program. They've got a new collective bargaining agreement that puts less emphasis on the seniority and bumping rules and the like. And I think they've got a pretty good blueprint in front of them that's going to allow them to move ahead over the long run. But there's a place that's going to have to be patient because they're digging out of a very deep hole.
All right, let's take some questions. And I think we had this gentleman right back here. Yes, sir. There you go. Hold that down. That's great. Thank you.
What, out of the numbers and statistics that you brought up, was the role of parents in the elevation of the children, education, and that infrastructure?
Well, it's an important question. I think you're probably going to hear more about that when in the subsequent panel when the folks from the community schools program come on. I think. I have no way of quantifying this as such because all of the districts we've gone into, both districts that have made substantial progress and districts that have made no progress at all claim to have involved parents to an extensive degree. I suspect that's not true. That they say it, but they have no way of knowing what true parental engagement really is, and how it is that parents might be more engaged in the overall academic performance of their children. Cleveland, as a matter of fact, was one of these school districts that had a very aggressive, not communities and schools program, but had a very aggressive home visit program where parents actually had people going to the homes. They were being given some support in how to support their kids in homework assignments and all of that. It was actually one of the largest home visitation programs of any in the country. So something there didn't connect to the overall academic attainment of the kids. So it could be that people were going into homes and training people on the wrong thing, or they weren't the parents weren't necessarily following through, or the school district was doing one-time visits but then didn't do any follow-up. So you had no way of, and I don't necessarily want to suggest that home visits are the only way to try to engage parents, but it was a good illustration of a school district that made no academic gains, yet purported and on its face seemed to have a parent involvement program that most other people would kind of look at and go, well, gee, that looks kind of convincing to me, but appeared not to produce any effect.
Let's take other questions. There's one way over here. Then we'll come down here. You can hang on a second and we'll wait for Ryan to get to you.
Good morning. Mike Frontier, Racine Unified School Board. We recently cut 57,000 kids from Head Start. I just heard on the radio coming in, Wisconsin has the largest gap between parents, white parents over 200% of poverty, 70%. Our African American kids only 20%. How important is preschool education, and what are the qualities of programs that seem to make a difference? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't mention this in my summary, but school districts that made substantial progress, at least in the early grades, clearly had a pretty substantial early childhood programs, and those programs had some kind of developmental component to them that made sure that they weren't just a custodial babysitting service of one kind or another, but actually helped kids gain some fluency with their numbers and letters and all of that. So a place like Cleveland also had lots of Head Start programs, but when we looked at those programs, we admitted that they weren't terribly developmental in nature. When we go into cities and see early childhood programs, we're really looking for whether or not those programs are articulated to the instructional program of the school system in a developmental kind of way. When they are, it produces an effect. And when the evaluations that we've seen and we've conducted in big city school districts across the country indicate that those early childhood programs, at least through the early grades, through grades 3, grades 4, and the like, really do make a difference.
Oklahoma recently all-day 4-year-old kindergarten, 10 kids per class. In Wisconsin right now, we're half-day, about 60% reimbursement of 4-year-old kindergarten.
Yeah. The cautionary tale, again, on the early childhood programs is like anything else, is that you could do early childhood programs really well and have it produce the kind of effect and kind of a building block academically for the kids that you want, but you can also do them really poorly, and it'll look to the outside like you're doing early childhood, but as I said, there are multiple ways to do this stuff well and multiple ways to do it badly, and you can do early childhood badly. So the lesson here is not just doing early childhood, the lesson is doing early childhood in a way that provides the academic building blocks for the kids, that doesn't have them so far behind when they enter kindergarten in the first grade.
Wallace, and then Ellen, we'll go right up here. Wallace, go ahead, and then we'll go.
Yeah, I guess so.
There you go.
Okay. There are a couple of things, I guess, on a broader scale. First of all, as you probably know, the standing of the United States in reading and in math compared to other countries, where we're not even in the top 20. I think the evaluation just came out on the 5th graders. Second, and I think related to that also has to do with the funding of education in the United States. We only spend about 5% of our gross domestic product on education, which puts us about number 15 in terms of countries around the world in terms of funding. So the impact of this, how we should address that, seems to me we're almost in a state of, not just a critical state, that we almost go into hell in a handbasket if we don't do something about this pretty quickly.
Yeah, a great question, and actually, I think your 2 points are linked. Again, one of the reasons why the big city school districts across the country have been such advocates of the Common Core standards was not only because it expected this, had the same high expectations of our kids as it had of all other kids across the country, and it helped iron out some of these inequities that we see in the expectations of kids. But if implemented properly over a long period of time, the Common Core could actually help this nation, because those standards are internationally benchmarked, to actually improve the overall academic attainment, not just of big city kids, but of kids across the United States. So I personally think that the Common Core holds a lot of promise in our ability to address that kind of ranking that you're referencing from the PISA and the TIMSS exams and the like. On the money part of this, you're going to get lots of people who argue more money, less money, et cetera. I personally am one of those people who says, look, if you're going to have high expectations and high standards for your kids, then you put the money out there to make sure they meet those standards. And whatever it takes to pay for it, then you pay for it. Now, having said that, let me, I'm all full of cautionary tales this morning, I guess, but it's also clear to us how you use the money really matters. And you can use the money badly, but if you use the money well on good curriculum, good programming, good professional development, good intervention systems, good data systems, and the like, you can make a substantial difference with the resources that you've got. So I'm personally a believer in high standards and the money to pay for them.
Ellen?
Good morning. You've used the word reform a number of times in characterizing the districts that have made progress. I was wondering if you could define the word or some of the characteristics of reform, because it has taken on a whole variety of definitions when you talk about school improvement, and I'm wondering
I'm glad you called my attention to it, because I'm using the term rather loosely because I've seen school districts reform themselves, restructure themselves, and this is part of the issue that I was referring to earlier, where people often do these endless numbers of reforms and then reforms on top of reforms and layers of reforms, and to a point where everything is so incoherent and disconnected that you can't make any sense of the direction that you're actually going in. I personally don't think that reform for reform's sake matters very much. I'm really referring to improvement, and improvement that is able to leverage enhancement in student outcomes. And that's what I'm referring to when I'm saying that issues of leadership and goals and accountability and curriculum articulation and quality and professional development and turnarounds and all of that, if you're doing restructuring and governance changes under the banner of reform, and it doesn't actually connect with raising the instructional quality for the kids, then it doesn't count. And this is where Paul and I may have
right there.
Yeah, there. Paul and I may have some differences because I'm not necessarily. Paul's going to talk about portfolio models. And I'll probably have some words about that when we both get on the same stage together. But my general take on this is that if the changes in structure in governance aren't actually pointed in a way that gets you improvements in instructional quality, classroom improvement, and better outcomes for kids, it's just so much rearranging of the deck chairs.
I'm going to hold things right there. It's 9:20, and we're going to wrap up this segment. I'll explain how this works. If you follow hockey, maybe we have a couple hockey fans here. They call it changing on the fly, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to have Mike and I are going to step aside. Paul Hill and Alan Borsick will come down here. We'll continue a conversation, a little different take on urban education, and then Mike will come back and join Alan and Paul, and they'll have a three-way discussion, and we'll take more of your questions. So again, thanks for your attention. Mike Casserly, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Mike.
Appreciate it.
Paul Hill. That's me. Paul Hill is one of the major figures in American K-12 thinking, and has been for, if I dare say so, rather a while. Nothing personal. He is the founder of the Center for Reinventing Public Education at the University of Washington, Bothell. He is probably the single person most associated with the idea of portfolio school management in major urban areas. Long-time association with Rand, with Brookings, numerous books. A wise and knowledgeable person who has agreed to be here today, and I'm very appreciative of that, and to Michael Casterly. We've got Milwaukee Public Schools, we've got voucher schools, more than 100 of them. We've got a wide range of charter schools. Is that a portfolio?
No.
Okay, that's it. We'll be
Okay,
out.
thank you very much. So
Take it from there.
I wanted to violate expectation a little bit by talking about some other things before getting to portfolio, and I want to surprise Mike Casterly by how much I agree with him. And my role here is not to say that you should look at the problem from a completely different way than Mike suggested, but my role is more to be the glass is half empty guy in light of the real and true things Mike has already said. And I thought that two things that I would thematically say after Mike is that you have to acknowledge successes but not sit on them, and you have to acknowledge failures and do something about them. And that's the big theme of what I'm talking about. But I want to make some broader observations about where we are with education of urban disadvantaged children, and without at all gainsaying what Mike has already said about some progress being made. There has been improvement in some places and not everywhere, but where it's happened, it's real. I will say that one of the downsides of the Common Core is that it's going to sink scores and make people think that some improvements that are real are not, and that's a problem. But another point. But there's really been no success at scale, and you get districts that have made some progress, but still most of their kids are still desperately behind. You get other districts that haven't made any. You get school models like KIPP that make a big difference. Very hard to scale, very hard to reproduce. Basically, my big point is that we still don't know how to solve this problem, although we're working at it, and there are hints. The second point I make is that it's pretty clear that as far behind as we are, especially on education of disadvantaged kids in urban areas, that just doing the same thing for a long time is not going to cut it. We have to think outside of where we already are comfortable or where we know what we're doing. And the third point I want to make is that the solutions, and I believe with Mike that they will come, are not going to come in one hop. For just example, the KIPP schools in New Orleans and other places make a lot of difference, but they are not enough. The kids that get out of KIPP are better off than they would have been if they hadn't gone to KIPP, but they go to college and they have a lot of trouble. And that's not to put KIPP down, is to say that's a step, but we better not stop with that step. And then my big point is that in a situation where you don't have the solution, you have a few existence proofs that suggest there can be one, you can make real progress steadily. The one thing we need to do is not to rule anything out or in unless there's strong evidence for it. By in, I mean don't mandate that everybody do the same thing unless it's clear that really gets you all the way you want to go. And so my view is kind of as it's a boring scientific view, but it's sort of we need to think about this as a problem-solving problem, not a problem of celebrating a known solution because we haven't got it. And we need. My view is that we, especially in urban areas, need to use the thing that America in general is the best at in the world, which is to take an unsolved problem and work on it in a smart way till it gets solved. And this is, I refer to things, a lot of these are scientific, but we didn't get to the moon because we knew how to get there when Kennedy made the pledge. You know, we got to the moon because we and the same is true with the huge advances on cancer and on other things as well, like environment, although that's a constantly moving problem, is to start with what you've got, look at the alternative ideas that are there, try the alternative ideas, get rid of the ones that are turkeys, keep the ones that work, understand that doesn't get you far enough, scan again, and a multiple cycle of continuous improvement. That's how you solve a problem that you know can be solved, but you haven't got the answer yet. And here's kind of the big thematic statement I want to make after that setup, is that in Milwaukee and in a lot of other places, I'm working in about 40 school districts at the time, one thing we're doing, and this is even true in what I call the portfolio districts, is that the first step you make in the right direction becomes a barrier to the next step. And if that happens, if one step of success becomes, you're so happy with that, and it becomes so entrenched that you can't go the next step, then you're going to make a tiny bit of improvement and stop. In Milwaukee, and like Mike, I want to be suitably modest about how well I can talk about Milwaukee, but I think I'm safe to say a few things, which is that there are now kind of three providers of public education in Milwaukee. It's the district, the charters, and the vouchers. And each of those is making some progress, but not a lot. And each of them is staying in its lane and defending itself. What we got to is a very slightly higher equilibrium than we started to before, but there's no mechanism to drive this continuous improvement. And basically, some people that have heard me before will think what I'm going to say is heretical, but I've been thinking about charter schools, which I have a lot of good things to say about charter schools. I think chartering as a mechanism of oversight, telling a school you have a great deal of freedom over what you do, and you can employ your staff, and you can be coherent, but you'll be held accountable for whether it works, is the proper status for most public schools. But I'm not saying that every charter school that exists is better than every other school run any other way. So, but I've seen a problem with chartering, which to some small degree is my baby, which is it becomes a defensive coalition as well, and that people that run charter schools have a strong incentive to do the best they can for their kids, and they're either good in varying degrees or bad, and the people that authorize them have an incentive to keep a reasonably good set of schools under their purview, but they're not responsible for any kids other than the ones they admit. And the sort of same is true with voucher schools. And in a place like Milwaukee, the way it's evolved, that's true with the district too. It is responsible for the schools it operates. And my broader proposition, which may make people want to kill me, is that basically operating schools by anybody is incompatible with oversight and the driving for continuous improvement. And my problem with the charters and the vouchers and the district is all of them are essentially in conflict of interest. They need to defend what they've done, and they can't get outside their own box well enough to do the continual admission of failure and moving on. And so I think in Milwaukee and almost every other district I've been to, we're stuck. There's no mechanism to drive this beyond the comfort zones of the school providers. So we need an arrangement that doesn't exist. I've been arguing, and I actually will hawk you a book that's coming out later this year, about creating a mode of public oversight in a city that sits atop the school board, sits atop the charter schools, and is able to say, here's a group of kids who are not doing well anywhere, we need a different arrangement for them. Here's a set of schools that are competing in a neighborhood, and each one of them is too weak to be any good, we need to consolidate them. I really do think we need a form of government authority that exceeds what exists now. And my proposal would be that that authority not have the authority to run any schools. It have to work through the district or the charters or the vouchers. But it has it actually not have any authority to do things like employ teachers. But it absolutely can determine what schools are running in the district at the time. And then its job is to keep looking for better options. The thing that I think is the problem with the district especially, and I think with the voucher schools, less so with charters, is that there's not enough continual search for something better. And unless we do that, we're not going to get the problem solved. Now, I have a lot more to say about that, but I think I'll stop now. And
Is this happening anywhere? The portfolio idea you have, which has that broader oversight. And, you've mentioned in some of your writings New Orleans, New York City, which of course I don't know if that's still true at the moment.
Well, I'll talk briefly about New Orleans and New York City. You know, New Orleans is fun to talk about. A very hard situation to reproduce. You know, and God help us, we don't want another hurricane. But New Orleans is able to start pretty much over. Able to dramatize the opportunity and need and bring talent from all over Louisiana, all over the world. You know, and people came in, they wanted to do new things. They had the smarts to understand that the schools they needed in the first year may not be the ones they need in the 8th year, and so they didn't plant any that were permanent. You know, they made them all contingent. And not only did they set up a situation that attracted a lot of talent, got people excited, but they're also saying the schools we have this year may not be the ones we need next year, and so they're continuing to improve that. So I think that's a good model. Just very hard to see who's going to reproduce that so easily in a situation where you've got entrenched providers where the school district, which I will propose as an operator in conflict of interest, owns all the buildings and the like. So there's a problem in reproducing New Orleans. New York's a different story, where under the Bloomberg-Klein effort, the district was very good at saying, here are the schools we have that are not working for kids, and trying to find alternatives to them. And the district, either under Klein, was very smart at the way they look for different options. Everybody who reads the papers thinks that the whole new schools enterprise in New York City was about charter schools. Well, that's a fraction of it. Charter schools were important, especially in the elementary level. The high school, new schools, the improvement, the continual churning to get something better was done within the district by creating charter-like relationships with new schools, but they were actually with district employees. And so New York was very smart in that it used anything it could find, and it also had the advantage of being New York, so there are a lot of resources around there, a lot of people. But it also understood that unlike New Orleans, where they basically tried to staff all their schools with new employees, New York has I can't remember the numbers. It's almost 10,000 teachers, and there probably are some teachers in that 10,000 that they wish they didn't have. There are thousands of teachers and principals in New York City of very high ability, and so they tried really hard to give those people the best chance to succeed and to attract the best of them to come and lead schools. One thing in New York they learned is that often the natural leaders among teachers are not people who go to get a principal certificate because they think it's a dog's job and they think the training is stupid, and so they say, I'm going to stay a teacher, and they tried to lure those people into becoming principals, and those are the ones they put in the new high schools. So it's a long story, but New York was in the business of never being content with what it had, and I think that's a model. And I actually think that if there's a short bump in the current arrangement, with the backlash and the new mayor, but I think that it will be picked up again sometime in the next few years.
And that's one of the interesting things. I have right here one of your books, Strife and Progress. And at one point you have a chart of districts that are, and this is from copyrighted 2013, it's not an old book, districts that are making progress and who their leaders are and how central those leaders are. I think there's 8 of them. 6 of them are gone already.
Yeah, one of the leaders profiled in the book has been replaced by your former superintendent. And that's it is interesting that the leaders of these places, and you might have to remind me, but they included New York, New Orleans, Hartford, Baltimore, Denver, get some others. Most of the times when those leaders left, they were replaced by other leaders who were committed to the same strategy. The one thing that happens too often when a superintendent leaves, I know this because it's the same as happens with college deans, as I was the dean for a while. When a superintendent leaves, you're looking for somebody who's not like the one that just left. So if you had a Hispanic superintendent last time, the next one better be black. Or if you had a female, it better be a male. And those are the main attributes people are looking for. And basically, if you want to sustain school reform, the board has to say, here's our strategy, let's find the right person to keep it going. And that's what's happened in a lot of these districts.
This book, I don't normally focus just on the title of a book, but the title is Strife and Progress. We've been pretty good on the strife side.
Yeah, you're not the best.
Not so good on the progress side.
Yeah, I think you're in the upper quartile, but gee, they're better.
What's the role of strife?
Well, there's no question that serious school reform, however defined, requires people to do things differently. You know what? I mean, that's the same definition that Mike had, I think, a reform that changes what happens in the schools enough to make a difference to kids, which, and the answer is we don't even know how much that is, but it has to be a hell of a lot. And that means teachers have to work differently, means that they have to know different things, means they have to be assessed, means that schools have to be forthright about what they can accomplish and what they can't. And that's difficult. And what's happened in most of the districts that we look at, I'll just be forthright about this. I won't. I'm not here to. I'm not anti-union. I'm not here to make an anti-union message. But one of the big things that happens in most of the districts is that the collective bargaining agreements, especially that control who teaches in every school, have to be weakened to some degree, and the unions don't like that. And additional numbers of teachers via chartering and other mechanisms are hired outside the collective bargaining agreement. The unions don't like that. Charters end up being put in school buildings that unionized faculty thought were theirs. And so it annoys people, and people organize. And it isn't just unions. Families who liked their school because of its familiar, welcoming nature, and weren't paying attention to the fact that nobody in it was learning to read. When that school gets transformed, either by change of staff or even by chartering out, people are annoyed by that. The book is full of ways that school reform causes pain, and the reason I used that strife title in the title was that people were starting to say, "This is too bloody. We should back off all this stuff because it upsets people too much." And my strong view is that you can't get to where you need to go unless you're willing to upset people's routines, and that's going to cause problems.
But we're a little weak in Milwaukee on getting people to see the bigger picture because of the strife. These three channels. How do we get to how do we get people to work together on the bigger picture? What's working for kids?
I don't think if you leave any of the three sets of providers to their own devices, that will happen. And I'm not saying that any one of those sets of providers doesn't care about the kids they serve. They all do. But the question in the big city is, where are the kids? What are the kids that are not getting served, and who's going to do something about them? And I think school districts in particular, and I'm not here to indict Milwaukee because I don't know it that well, but school districts in particular are so constrained by the rules under which they operate, by the fact they have to employ the people they hired 50 years ago or whatever it is, that they tend to look the other way when they have schools that are consistently low performing and not be willing to do very much about them. One thing I know in my hometown in Seattle, every 5 years we have a big hoo-ha about institutional racism. And what it amounts to is we have schools serving black and brown kids that were bad 10 years ago, and they still don't work, and nothing as much has been done to them. And we say two things. One is we'll get over our institutional racism by an active conversion. Somehow it's all a moralizing thing. And the other thing is we're going to do much more professional development in the schools that don't work. But what happens, of course, is that the teachers in the schools that don't work are all looking for ways to get out of those schools, and as soon as they get their professional development, they move out. And so the schools are in the same places they were before. So, I mean, that is, I guess by one definition of madness, it's, to do the same thing over and over again if it doesn't work. And districts only have a certain repertoire of actions they can take. It's not enough. And I think it doesn't mean that the local board and superintendent couldn't decide that it was going to take a no-holds-barred approach to the lowest performing schools and seriously ask, is this school staffed, organized, and funded in such a way as it's likely to get better, or isn't it? If it isn't, then we have to do something fundamental. That might mean changing the leadership. If you know that's the problem, it might mean changing the whole culture, meaning bringing in a new provider. That kind of thinking, which is pretty uncommon in school districts, is what needs to happen if the district is going to be a source of a solution. And if it can't do that, it needs to be treated as one of three providers with an overarching accountability. So it could lose its schools if they don't succeed. But I don't want to lose my main point, which is that any city needs some mechanism, and I think it's not just the school board, that is saying where are the kids that are not getting what they need, what options do we have here among all the sectors, who can we bring in from someplace else, how can we make talent that is in the schools and is trying to stay hidden because they don't trust the district, but these are the people we need to lead the schools, how do we give them confidence in it? Those kind of questions are just not usually asked.
So how do we get to those questions?
Well, I would prefer, so as an academic, I can imagine anything I like. But as a person sitting in front of an audience, that ought to be realistic. I would prefer that states create something like what I've written in my book about the local civic education councils, whose job it is to watch the portfolio of multiple providers and ask, where do we have an unfilled need and how are we going to get it met? Where are kids being neglected? How are we going to change that for them? And be indifferent about whether a school is operated by the district or a charter or by a voucher. You could even imagine, for example, in what I'm describing, that you might ask the Lutheran schools to say, can you put a school in this neighborhood? You seem to be the one that people there most trust. That kind of understanding that all the assets of the community need to be brought to bear here. But if you can't get that in a state law, I think you could do that locally with a coalition of the providers and a strong superintendent who wanted to be basically the CEO of public education for all the kids, and wanted to create a collaborative relationship among the sectors instead of just represent one of them.
The same question that Mike Goucher asked Mike Casserly. Can it be done? We've got sets of schools in Milwaukee that are just chronically horrible when it comes to the results they're getting. Does it have to be that way? The
No,
kids,
it
the
doesn't have
lives
to.
they lead, the homes they have?
Well, so, I mean, Mike, I can't improve on how Mike described the challenges, because they're real. And the answers, you know, I tried to propose initially, it isn't like we know the answers, but it's for sure that very disadvantaged kids need some kind of preschool. And maybe that needs to be provided charitably, you know, if you can't get it done by public policy. It needs to be focused. One of the advantages of doing it charitably is you could actually do it to the kids that need it and not for everybody. But I'll expand on that if you want. But we need a tremendous emphasis on vocabulary and reading in the early grades so that kids leave third grade actually able to read complex materials, and we need a tremendous emphasis on early math up through fractions. One thing, I don't know all you know, but disadvantaged kids are profoundly less likely than advantaged kids to leave sixth grade or seventh grade knowing fractions, decimals, rates, percentages, and knowing their equivalencies. And if you don't know that, you can't do any math. And it is brutal to learn it. And if you've been in a family where the parents aren't always fiddling with that stuff, it's even harder to learn it. So we probably need a whole different way of approaching elementary school. You need to experiment with that. And I don't think there's any charter, any voucher program, any district that solved that problem. So we need to have the flexibility to focus on it. I think that could mean either new schools with a totally different focus, or maybe even a university that experiments with providing the math programs in the first 3 or 4 years of kids being in school, so they actually are ready for fractions and the like. But nobody right now is focusing clearly enough on those problems.
Let's take questions. Ryan in the room?
Can I? So Mike did the same thing. I'm doing the same.
Yes. Okay.
So Mike,
we're being consistent.
Mike wanted to say more about Cleveland, and I thought it was really interesting. And I agree. I mean, the things he said about Cleveland up until the last year or so were totally true. Cleveland is trying to get its act together. The mayor, who actually was in charge of the schools for 15 years, finally realized that when he sent his 2 grandchildren, one to a regular neighborhood public school and one to a charter school, the differences in what they were getting in it pissed him off. And so he said, okay, now I'm actually in charge of school, so I'm going to do something about it. And he put them on a road to serious assessment of where aren't we cutting it, and put them on a road to doing much more aggressive collaboration with charters as just another asset in the community. And they're working very hard to do all that and to beat the wasted resources out of things in the school district. One thing I revealed this morning is I've seen an analysis in Cleveland of how much they spend on professional development per teacher, and it was, the last analysis was $26,000 per teacher per year. Wow. It's an astounding amount of money, which is at best wasted and probably counterproductive, because it's all broken into a million things that disrupt the schools, and you have to leave your school in order to get training on something you don't need to know. And so they're starting to realize how much disruption of the schools, how much of a problem they've created for their educators at the district level, and they're working on that. But one reality in Cleveland is that they hadn't passed a levy in about 15 years. And in Ohio, the levy is part of your base funding. If you lose that, you go backwards. And so they were on a dwindling financial base for a long time. On the strength of the mayor's intervention and determination to get something done, they passed a levy. Everybody knows they will not pass another levy unless they can show something. And if you look on the Cleveland Schools website, they have a clock, a doomsday clock, that says that if we don't show something in 3 years, we're dead ducks. And that's dramatic, but that's how seriously they're taking it. And I would say they're doing smart things. Will that be enough? I have no idea. So Cleveland is a very interesting example of a city that has awakened to a lot of things, but maybe too late. And one thing they've finally caught on to is that they have a teaching force that is a hermetically sealed bunch of people that have been employed for a long time. That force has been shrinking over time as the school enrollment shrank and as they had to cut the youngest teachers. So all they've got now are the most expensive teachers, and the class sizes are huge. And as Mike said, teachers are teaching things they weren't trained to do, but they've preserved the employment at the cost of everything else. This is a city, although Cleveland is poor, you think of it, city with major universities, the greatest orchestra in the world, the most important medical center in North America. This is a city with vast intellectual resources that have been walled off. And they're trying to say, how do we get that back in, to provide people that might run a school or might run a sequence on science, might take over the math programs in elementary schools in this neighborhood. So they're thinking outside the box, and I think that's the lesson to Milwaukee. You are close to the level of Cleveland in terms of what is here. There are a lot of poor people, a lot of things that are not working, a lot of inequity. There's also vast resources in terms of intellectual firepower, smart people who are not teaching now, and we need to find a way to tap all that.
Let's take a few questions. I don't think Ryan is in the room, so I don't have a microphone for the back. So if I call on you, which I will, speak loudly.
I am not I'm not an educator, so I'm not speaking from that experience. Is there a role for community organizations to partner with struggling schools to help them with just what you're describing, reading in the low grade, K3, to help with those kinds of things? Is there a role for those organizations?
I'll say,
Is there a role for community organizations, if you couldn't hear
right,
the
I'll say something more about that, but Reuben Jacobson, who's going to talk next, has been working in Cincinnati, where there's a really concerted effort to combine lots of community organizations, even healthcare organizations, and tutoring, and integrate that into the school program. It's a very powerful thing. It often depends on the openness of the school. It really doesn't matter very much if I walk into a school and tutor a kid on math based on what I remember about math and no integration with what's being taught. But if the school wants to make this an integral part of its program, you get vast improvements. And a lot of schools, district-run schools and charter schools, are trying to tap those resources.
How do you feel about programs?
If you push the little doogie there.
How do you feel about programs like Uncommon Schools or AUSL? Do you think they're kind of a temporary Band-Aid over it or an effective way to
Uncommon
reform?
School, make sure I remember what that is.
Uncommon Schools, I believe it's mainly on the East Coast. It's
Chain of charter schools.
It's a chain of charters, right. Yeah. So I think one of the positive evolutions in American education has been the emergence of some charter management organizations that allow many schools to be branded and coherent, makes it easier for teachers to know what to do and parents to know what they're going to get. That can be valuable. And I was also wondering whether you were asking me about some of the networks of blended schools like Rocket Ship. And I think these are interesting and worth looking into. I think the communities ought to try them out and see whether they're useful and see whether they might even imitate some of them. I don't think any of those is the answer. I think that to go back to the word I haven't used yet, I think is portfolio, is that any community needs a variety of schools. If you think about Milwaukee, kids come in at different levels. They need different things. You have different languages. You have groups of kids that learn through arts and groups of kids that are clueless about that. The idea that every school would look alike makes no sense. And a lot of the districts that Mike was talking about have caught on to that. Boston, for example, has a lot of what they call pilot schools that are kind of in-district charters that are meant to be different and give people options. That is a positive thing, and sometimes these external providers can help do that in a coherent way. But one thing that I would say, actually, Abby Shumwinger and I were talking about that this morning. Milwaukee is going to get a certain number of KIPS and Aspires and the big names, and that will be a useful thing. But most of the development of new schools has got to be local. And local, I don't mean just using the teachers you've got now, although some of them are going to be great, but bringing in the universities and the nonprofits and the Urban League. And I mean, there are all kinds of intellectual resources in the community that need to understand they have a chance to do something good, and they'll be supported in doing it.
Mr. Sheehy.
Yeah. Paul, can you describe the tool of common enrollment and how that plays a role in developing a portfolio district, or how it might work in Milwaukee?
Right. So a number of the leading portfolio districts, meaning districts that are trying to have different kinds of schools run by multiple providers but all held to the same accountability, they've learned that it can quickly become a nightmare for parents because everybody's got his own admissions criteria and his own timing, and they do their lotteries at different times, and some people can't get any information about one school, but they hear a lot about another. So Denver, New Orleans, and now New York and Boston are moving toward a common enrollment system where every publicly funded school, whether it's a voucher school or a district-run school or a charter, it actually accepts one application. The parents can apply one time to all the schools. There's one lottery that's run centrally so that schools can't jump the gun and do my lottery the day before so I can get the best pool. And the way it's run mathematically, it's like the way you allocate, the medical schools allocate doctors to internships, is that nobody gets placed till everybody gets placed. It's a big computer model, but it means that if somebody will say, oh, there are already this school only has one slot, we'll have a lottery for that slot. No, they're all lotteried, and it has created in New Orleans, which was clearly getting inequitable school placements, a lot more equity. Poor parents are getting more information. Poor kids are getting into schools they weren't getting into before. And even the way they run it, it used to be in informal lotteries that you kind of had to game it. Oh, here's a really popular school. I'd love to get my kid in here, but I bet there are a lot of applicants. I better not apply to that because I waste my first choice, so I'll choose my fourth choice as my first choice. The way the math works, there's no incentive to do that. You should say what your first choice is because you might get it, and that not only has the advantage of increasing equitable placement, but it gives information about what kinds of schools a lot of people want to get into and therefore ought to be built in the city. Is that? Yeah. But I think it's very promising here. It takes a lot of trust. We're trying to do this in Philadelphia, and the different sectors, the charters, and the district and the Catholic schools and others are all sure the other guys are going to cheat, and they need to find some overarching organization that everybody trusts in order to run this.
I believe we have a third chair. And the wonderful Carol Dufek is going to bring up the third chair. And I will invite Mike Casterly to come back down here.
How come I get the one that's not Marquette?
It's just a color thing, and we're just trying to maintain.
Yeah.
Do you want this one?
No.
We're all in favor of loyalty to Marquette.
Opportunity to say something, yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.
I think we're all set here. I'll throw out a very open question and let both of you go in whatever direction you want. What is the state of the whole idea of chartering? And what impact is it having?
Après-vous.
I'm not an expert on chartering. I think Paul's trying to dish this one off to me, but I think it's kind of all over the lot. There are clearly some charter providers that are doing an excellent job with some kids that the traditional schools have not done very well with. At the same time, there are some charters that are just god-awful, and that's also true of the regular schools as well. Overall, it looks like kind of nationally that the charters are producing about the same results that the regular schools are producing, although there appears to be a greater range of upper to lower than the regular schools are. As a market share, they're certainly growing, particularly in cities. I think probably about 20% of all of the cities that are part of our coalition, 20% of the kids are in charter schools of one kind or another. So the market share is clearly growing. The results are about the same as you see elsewhere. That would be my quick summary.
So now that Mike said something, I know what to say. The national figures are what Mike says they are. The more particular studies of individual places, actually done by the same people as did the national figures, show that in the big cities where public officials, whether the district or somebody else, is serious about using chartering as a way to create new options for the kids that don't have them, charters outdo the regular public schools serving the same kids by quite a lot. And the big factors here are, one, the authorizer, which is whatever government agency the state law says can determine who gets a charter, needs to be quality oriented. It needs to be willing to put a high bar for people to get charters, and then it needs to be to say our charters have to be good, or we're wasting everybody's time, and call its supply of charters, because there will be some that don't work out. And that varies tremendously from place to place. And in places where it's part of a citywide strategy to improve schools, it makes a difference. The other is that state laws vary tremendously. In Maryland, for example, charter schools must live under the local collective bargaining agreement. And there's this funny thing that's happening in Maryland where charter schools are also funded on a common per pupil basis, but they have to employ teachers that are paid under the salary schedule, and that means every year the teacher costs get higher and higher and higher, but the funding doesn't. And so charters are always just on the edge of collapse there, and it doesn't surprise me that the results are not so hot. In other places where there's a commitment to saying, hey, we're in the business of funding education for kids, let's make sure that every kid carries the same amount of money to whatever school he goes to. And when that's the case, charters are equitably funded, and there's a lot of investment in building the charter programs, doing it right. You get a big difference. So I don't think we really disagree on that. It's a promising element of the system, and I think it also creates a precedent for the way public districts might relate to their own schools, which is to say, we try to fund them equitably, we try to give them every chance to succeed, but we have to be realistic. Some won't always work. If that were the way that the districts operated as well, I think that'd be a good thing. But it's still it's not the silver bullet. It's part of a solution set.
Yeah, I'd like to, if we could, take up one of the issues that Paul raised that I think he's probably struggling with and I'm struggling with as well. Because you have in places like Philadelphia and Cleveland and Milwaukee and D.C. and other places. D.C. also has something akin to a common enrollment system as well. It's at least a coordinated enrollment, if not common. Is this notion of putting someone on top of the provider system that would essentially coordinate, say, voucher schools, charter schools, and the regular school system. I'm kind of agnostic to this, but I have to say that I think what would make that work or not work spins around issues of accountability, and that is whether or not that entity would infuse some accountability into the three providers. Otherwise, it looks to me like simply adding another bureaucratic layer to the educational apparatus could actually be a barrier to improvement rather than an improvement. Now, to the extent that you want that overarching layer, if one concluded it was a good idea, to mostly play the role of infusing accountability into the system, you have to wonder, where is the state in this conversation? Because it seems to me that entity is simply playing the role that the state should have been playing all along in ensuring that the accountability systems for the multi-provider system is convincing and strong and uniform and fair. Otherwise, it's not clear to me why it is you would provide another layer on top of all of the layers that you've already got.
So I think that's all really important. And if I can flog my book, I take the topic up. Interestingly,
I haven't read it.
No, nobody's read it. So let me just start at the very beginning. You know, the local district is a state instrument. It has been constrained to do, I would argue, the wrong thing. You know, the local district ought to be the multi-sector overseer, indifferent to who does provision. That's not what it is now. I think the state, the kind of overarching mechanism I'm talking about, almost certainly has to have the warrant of the state, and is basically an instrument of the state that operates locally. The reason that states don't do so much locally, well, there are a lot of reasons, but one of them is that localities are different, and the states don't have the capacity to really know what's going on and make good judgments locally. So they probably need an instrument locally. But I agree with Mike that if you just build another institution, it will be captured by somebody and be corrupted. And so my view is the state needs to create these conditionally and take their warrant away and build a new one if they start to favor providers or ignore certain groups of kids. And there are lots of mechanisms to do that, but one small one is already talked about a lot, which is the Recovery School District in Louisiana that starts to take away schools from negligent districts. I think of that as a stopgap, but that shows the state is actually starting to take some accountability for kids' education. But with Mike, I don't think you can get this all done without the state. And last thing I'll say about that, in Cleveland, 18 months ago when they got religion, the governor offered the mayor a legislative package of anything he wanted, and he practically got it. And one thing we've already found out is they didn't know what to ask for because they're being hamstrung by things they probably could have eliminated by law. So it is pretty smart to think about what kind of state legal structure you want when you start. We're doing an analysis of that, trying to give people some options. But yeah, you can do a lot locally to get it permanent, to make it really work well. The state has to accommodate it.
Yeah. One other thing, Alan, that I wanted to address, because it has implications not only for Milwaukee but for all urban school districts across the country, was Paul's reference to New York City. And this comment is not really about charter schools per se, because his description of how New York City ran was perfect. One of the interesting things about New York City, that it was a really good lesson for lots of cities, is that it moved very quickly from its initial theory of action to a theory of action that was largely based around site-based management and empowerment. And it moved in that direction very fast. And I rather think it moved too fast. Understanding because the theories of action will differ from circumstance to circumstance in a school district's evolution and improvement. And being clear about where a school system is in its performance, what its capacities are, where its student achievement is, and the like, is important in deciding what kind of theory of action is most appropriate for a school district at a particular point in time. Because all of the conversations that we've just had about what works and what doesn't work can't simply be airlifted into a city and expected to work. It will often depend on where that school district's capacity is and where it is in the process of its reforms. And understanding the evolution of improvement in a school district is important to making sure that the theory of action matches what the school district needs. In addition to New York City and studying New York City and how it is they did that too fast, the opposite might also be viewed in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina, where they stayed with the same theory of action for too long. And I think it actually stalled out their academic performance. They switched it up over the last few years, and I think have now moved somewhat closer to a more appropriate empowerment approach. That is, an approach that allows individual schools more autonomy over their instructional program, the selection of their people, and the like. But getting this, the reforms right for the stage at which the school district is at is really critical to making all of this stuff work.
So it's 5 years or 7 years or 10 years from now, and things have gotten better in Milwaukee, Brown Deer, Kenosha, schools and school systems around here that are serving high needs kids because we did what? You're welcome. Just pie in the sky stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'll take an extreme version, and Mike may take the other one. So, the school districts in those places were much more candid about the schools in which kids were not learning, and they looked for broad options, and that included giving some of their junior people chances to build new schools under grants of autonomy. And they even looked outside to build charters. The charter sector got much more self-critical, pruned its bottom, and looked much more aggressively than before for people and options that could make a difference and do something for kids. And the voucher sector collapsed the number of schools it was running, consolidated some, tried to bring the churches much more aggressively into doing quality control, and overall that led to improvement. Now, I could say that could happen faster if there was some kind of authority to make that happen. But if the different providers got out of their lanes and started to say our responsibilities are to kids, not to our school providers, I think you get those kinds of outcomes.
Okay. This is probably the core at which Paul and I would disagree. I am less convinced that simply providing multiple providers, which a place like Milwaukee has. You've got lots of different kinds of providers, and by and large, student performance in the city is generally low, even though you've got some improvement going on across all of them. I don't think it's the multiplicity of providers whether they stay in their lanes or they don't stay in their lanes. I think it's whether or not the providers offer a quality instructional program and whether they are focused, organized, and oriented around improving the academic performance of their children. And I think you can rearrange these providers until the cows come home. And how much each provider has of the entire marketplace, and it won't on its own produce improvement in student achievement. What improves student achievement is improved instruction.
Questions? Who hasn't asked a question yet?
That shot some hands up.
Little has been said about the profession, teachers. How effective, how prepared are teachers coming into the profession, both in terms of their understanding, their capability, and their effectiveness?
Not very. I personally think that one of the weak links in the entire education apparatus is the quality of our colleges of education. And I can see this a lot as school districts, just to give you a concrete example, I can see this a lot in as a lot of these school districts across the country are moving to implement the Common Core. We see almost nothing from the colleges of education. There are exceptions where teacher preparation is trying to now prepare new teachers to teach in a vastly different way than we've ever prepared them for before. I personally am of the opinion that a good number of these colleges simply need to be shuttered because they are not shuttered, producing the teachers that are adequately prepared or even could be adequately prepared for teaching to these new standards.
Just a
I know you're with the College of Education.
No, but the dean is sitting right here.
I just wondered how many people I insulted.
So just another addition to that. There's some research about what are the attributes of teachers that do better in their careers, and there's a little bit about SAT scores or the like, but really what matters most of all is what's their experience when they come in, and whether they come into a school that tries to develop them. And Mike and I might disagree with this, but I don't think districts are very good engines for developing teachers. I think schools are. And you have to be in a school that is really seriously taking the new teacher as an asset that has to be developed. And one of the lethal attributes of school districts is that teacher allocation works so that senior teachers get to choose where they go, and that means that the slots available for junior teachers are always in the most troubled schools, which are the most divided and the least likely to be good places for them to be helped along, and the places that they get the hell out of as soon as they get any seniority. So we not only have a problem of the level of preparation, I agree with Mike, but teachers are not lunkheads. I mean, these are people that chose the profession, and many of them are maybe they're not terribly well trained, but they're pretty smart, and if they get the chance to learn, they will. And I think we need, this is a thwart the conversation Mike and I have had, but we need a system where schools have enough ownership of their staffs to take them seriously instead of knowing they're going to be gone next year, so what the hell.
Yeah, by the way, I agree completely with you that not only are colleges of education kind of falling down on the job, but school districts themselves do not do a very good job. I don't know whether your number about $26,000 of professional development per teacher in Cleveland is the right number or the wrong number. It's not the point. The truth
Has to be the wrong number.
Yeah, sure. The truth of the matter is that school districts do not do a very good job of building the capacity of its workforce. It's just the truth, and they don't know how to. So enormous amounts of resources are wasted in an attempt to pretend to.
One of the things that just to protract our argument here, that one advantage that it's ironic that charter schools have, or other schools that are funded on a per pupil basis, and so they can't just get however much money it costs to fund their teachers, which is the case with regular public schools, means that the school has to regard its teaching staff as something it manages. And it has to bring in new people and make them as effective as it can. And it has to judge its other people as they get older and more expensive about which ones are really assets to the school you wouldn't want to do without them, either because of what they teach or how they influence other teachers, and which are really not any better than the new teachers. And so the schools that have the ability to manage their teaching forces are much stronger. And one of the reasons why the district as a provider is as weak as it is it doesn't have the ability to give its schools that power. And they're trying. I mean, Cleveland's trying to do that.
Yeah, there is one of the ways in which they're trying to do it is to rely a lot more and build the capacity of these professional learning communities at the school level. But this model of essentially teachers helping each other build their own capacity at the school level, while a very, very powerful idea, and one in which, frankly, I think holds a great deal of promise. Teachers are often, teachers are trying to help themselves in ways that they often don't know how to do. If we could figure out better ways to make that particular model of capacity building work better, I think we'd actually have something much more powerful.
It seems to me that a lot of the rankings we're talking about are dealing with standardized tests. So my question is related to that standardized testing, and perhaps it's a rhetorical question, but do you think using, or I guess what impact do you think using standardized testing, what impact do you think it has on supporting capable special education students who are put into alternative, non-rigorous curriculums that remove their performance data from data being used in making conclusions about a district's ranking and therefore their financial support?
Oh, gee, Mike.
Special ed in general is certainly also a very good question.
Yeah, special is a good issue. Let me take the broader part of your question first. In the discussion that I had earlier about which systems seem to be making more progress than others, I was really relying on evidence from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a low-stakes test, and no one really is held accountable for the results other than either the praise or the shame that they might get from the results that come out, which sometimes, by the way, can be considerable. That said, I frankly think that the American public education system badly overtests and tests inappropriately and doesn't know what to do with the results terribly well. I also think that the testing system has now warped the instructional program of a lot of school systems. I think that Common Core will be a counterweight to that. But I think the vast majority of tests that are now given in this country are counterproductive, have skewed the overall instructional program, and are often used as ways of placing, identifying, and diagnosing kids that results in them being put into instructional programs that are ill-suited to their needs because the assessments themselves are so poorly structured that you don't know what you've got when you've got the results. And this is not a Milwaukee problem. This is a national issue. And I think while the debate about testing that's going on in this country at the moment is largely centered around teacher evaluation issues, and it's an issue that's largely been raised by the unions and others, I think there is a much, much broader question at stake here about the nature of the testing that we do, why we are doing it, and what we do with those results.
Just a little comment on that. The one thing about testing is that it gives a prompt measure of how well a kid is doing, and that's different from waiting to get graduation rates or college enrollment without remediation. I mean, that's fine, but a lot of the horse could be out of the barn by the time you wait for the kid to be that old. So we have to figure out a way to use testing that identifies kids and groups of kids that are really at risk of not getting through school. But clearly we've overemphasized it. And I will declare right here, I'm one of the people on what is called the reform movement who doesn't think there ought to be centralized teacher evaluation systems, that things like value-added measures ought to be made available to the school to help manage the personnel, but not to weaken school leadership by telling people what they can pay their teachers. You know, my horror in Washington, D.C., for example, is that if I were a principal and Mike were one of my teachers and I said, you're the best teacher I've got, here's a group of kids that I understand is hell on wheels, you might not do well with them, but you have the best chance. Will you take it on and I'll stand behind you? I might not be able to do that. And that is really destructive. So I think we've overused tests, but we can't do without them altogether.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And I don't want you to think that I'm anti-test. I am not. I think there is an appropriate role for tests. Tests are critical to help us understand where students are. It's not the only measure we ought to be using, but it's an important gauge of where kids are academically. So I know there are people who call for the elimination of standardized testing, and I think that's way beyond the pale.
We'll squeeze in one last short question. Deb Kerr.
Hi, I'm the superintendent from Brown Deer, and we have one of the highest minority populations behind MPS in the state of Wisconsin. Recently, our legislators passed a bill repealing the 180-day requirement for calendar, which allows us to determine when we go to school. Unfortunately, the tourism lobby has a stronghold on when we actually can start. So talk about how the schools that have made great reforms and changes have utilized time and flexibility to accelerate learning.
This is a great question because I think it differs a little bit in charters versus regular school districts. I think charters are probably freer and have exercised the freedom that they have had to either extend the school day or extend the number of school days in the year to a much greater extent than regular school districts have been able to do because of all kinds of financial and contractual arrangements. If there's anything at all that I think regular schools have learned from charter schools, it's that sometimes, particularly with poorer populations, that longer school days and longer, possibly a longer school week or a longer school year can actually make a big difference. God bless the tourism industry, but, you know, some things are more important than others.
Well, who the hell comes to Wisconsin anyway?
People from Illinois.
Yeah. You mean in the winter?
Right,
in the winter.
It's nice just some of the year.
I wanted to add, now that I've alienated the entire audience, I wanted to...
I didn't say that.
No. He wrote it down and I said it. Margaret Rosa, who works with me a lot, has done some really interesting analysis on what it would cost to extend the school year And most of that is teacher salary costs, but one of the peculiar things about it is that we already pay teacher benefits year round. So that the teacher salary costs in the summer are coming at a big discount. And districts have a lot of money they spend in different ways, and she's been urging districts to consider putting enough money into additional teacher salaries to add a month, or a week a couple of weeks on either end of the summer. And these things need to be tried out. I don't think this is the sovereign solution, but it's pretty clear that any kid loses his edge almost on a daily basis, and poor kids seem to suffer that even more.
Mike Casserly of the Council of Great City Schools, Paul Hill of the Center for Reinventing Education, two heavy hitters in America, and our thanks to both of you. Thank you.
I'm so glad that I didn't have to flick the lights on and off like I used to do when I was a teacher. But I want to echo something that Alan just said, and also to thank the law school for hosting this series. And we have an arrangement, a partnership that we co-host. We let them do public policy events around education. In turn, they let us co-sponsor, and oh, by the way, we let them pay for all of it. So that's what I like probably best about this arrangement. I have to tell you that one of the things I did to prepare for this event was to look at who was coming. And I don't know, if you look around, this is like a family reunion. You all are literally a who's who of education in Milwaukee. And one thing that I will say about Milwaukee, this is my 10th year of being dean, is nobody will ever accuse Milwaukee of not having the will to get better. We need to work on this skill part, but give yourself a hands for everything that you do. So this portion of the program turns from the national perspective, the elsewhere part, to the Milwaukee, and what we've done a little bit in the past, but more so in the present, and given a look to the future. I appreciate Alan asking me to moderate this event because I don't know, I like to think that the College of Education here at Marquette has really positioned itself around social innovation. We've done some things over the last, 7 years or so that I think at least lets people know we're open-minded to different types of educational reform. And I do want to give a shout out to Milwaukee Succeeds. We've worked closely with Milwaukee Succeeds. I think it gives us great hope for the future. I think what Paul alluded to about like how's the community all going to come together around this, and I really do think that gives us our best hope. We've also been involved with 4 other Catholic institutions of higher education to create the Greater Milwaukee Catholic Education Consortium that we think is making a huge difference for our Catholic schools. We, along with Cardinal Stritch, brought Teach for America to Milwaukee, and that's certainly making an impact here. We have our Marquette Educator blog I know it's read by people like Greg Thornton and by Tony Evers, because if I write something they don't like, they call me. And then more recently, we've been working over the last 2 years on a feasibility study for a Cristo Rey High School in Milwaukee, and there will be some news about that probably a little bit later on. But let us turn to the panelists. My first order of business is to introduce them to you, and so I'm going to do it alphabetically. And so immediately to my left is Nada Abbott, and I've had the pleasure to work with Nada on Milwaukee Succeeds. In fact, I would have to characterize her as one of the driving forces of Milwaukee Succeeds. She is with GE Healthcare, with community outreach, and its community volunteer programs. She's sort of a liaison, if you will, between GE and various community organizations. And you might know that GE is extensively involved in trying to help our schools. One of my colleagues, Cynthia Elwood, who now works at Marquette University and was with MPS for a long time, she said to me before the event, she goes, GE has really helped MPS. That's, to me, like a ringing endorsement of the kind of work that NADA does. Besides Milwaukee Succeeds, GE Healthcare has a grant to MPS of $20.4 million. And that includes things like the Common Core curriculum as part of that. And by the way, a lot of the teacher education institutions in this region, anyway, are involved in the Common Core, like white on rice. So I just wanted to make that point. And Nada has been at GE Healthcare for 15 years. Worked on global supply chain management, regulatory affairs, that type of thing. She holds a graduate degree in economics and industrial sociology. And she holds a distinction that even Bruce Lee doesn't have. She is a Six Sigma, if you know that process, black belt. Woo! So please welcome Nada Abo. Okay, and next to Nada is Larry Miller. And Larry is very familiar to me because he also teaches in the College of Education. Now, in addition to his primary role, which is he's in his second term on the Milwaukee Board of School Directors. He's played a leading role in the recent work about the discernment associated to what to do with low-performing schools in MPS. He's chair of the board's Student Achievement and Improvement Committee. Larry was an MPS teacher for 16 years and an administrator, I believe, for 2 years. He worked at Custer High School and Metropolitan in Du Bois, I think, as well. He's one of the editors of Rethinking Schools, which some of you know is a pretty imaginative effort on how we need to do reform in schools from the inside out. And I would say that after all these roles, I don't know anybody who's a more fierce advocate for kids or staunch defender of public school than Larry Miller. So please welcome Larry. Next up, Cole Knuppel, co-founder, managing director of Schools That Can Milwaukee, highly respected and impactful nonprofit we have here. It works on the improvement of leadership and teaching in a range of schools in Milwaukee, including some you'll recognize, Bruce Guadalupe, Milwaukee College Prep, Notre Dame Middle School, and St. Marcus Lutheran School. Previously, Cole helped lead Wisconsin Lutheran's very innovative Center for Urban Teaching. And not everybody knows that he was really instrumental in the development of St. Marcus and was also the superintendent of Hope Christian Schools here in Milwaukee. As a sideline, Cole is a football official. And the thing I know you don't know about him is he's a member of the Flying Knuppel Brothers, which is a championship 3-member basketball team. And this is very true. And if I ask him, what's his biggest claim to fame, he said, hiring Henry Tyson. I know Henry's here somewhere, or he was before. So I think that's really good. Please welcome Cole Knuppel. And last is Reuben Jacobson, Senior Associate for Research and Strategy at the Coalition for Community Schools, Washington-based nonprofit. Reuben develops and implements the Coalition's research agenda and conducts analyses on community schools, which is one of the options that Milwaukee Public Schools is working on for some of its low-performing schools. And Reuben has been working on trying to develop support for that model in our area. Prior to his current position, he worked as a research analyst in education for the American Institutes for Research, and he taught 5th and 6th grade for 2 years in Washington, D.C., which gives him more credibility than probably any of the other stuff that I said. What do you think about that? Teaching is really such an important thing to have that experience. Reuben has a bachelor's degree from a nearby institution that has a team in the NCAA Final Four. A master's in education from George Washington, and a master's degree in teaching from American University. He's currently working on his PhD at the University of Maryland, College Park. And Reuben is a Milwaukee native, and I'm told he has his own cheering section here. His parents, Jan and Bonnie Jacobson, and his brother Max are somewhere in our audience, so please identify yourself. How about a hand for the whole family? Okay, so what we agreed to was that each member would give an opening statement, and it would give you some insight into the kind of work that they do, and we're really going to try to keep it to 3 or 4 minutes per opening statement, and then I probably will have one question that I ask each panelist. Others can certainly respond to it, and then maybe some general questions and hopefully some questions for you all as we near the end of our time together. So let's start off with Nada, your opening statement.
I
I was hoping I'll go after Ruben since he's a guest here in Milwaukee. First of all, thank you very much. Is the
Close, just get it closer.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here today. I realize everyone is very busy, and given our busy lives, spending a morning is a big deal. And in my experience working in Milwaukee, there is no shortage of people who care deeply about education. So in that regard, we're very lucky. And some of our previous presenters were speaking about the depths and breadths of talent and people who care about education. Obviously, my perspective coming from GE and coming from quality background, which is kind of funny. My dad started out as a teacher and then became quality engineer. I started from being quality engineer and then went to work in education, so it's a little bit backwards. And my interest and what I see, where I see a lot of potential, is around application of continuous improvement in education and in community-wide efforts. And some of the great examples we have, as Bill mentioned, is Milwaukee Succeeds here, where we're trying to bring everyone from all walks of educational spectrum, public, private, charter, and people interested in education to really focus on the outcomes, focus on the customer, and understand the system of delivery that we have here that we sometimes not aware of, and see how we can work collectively to improve it. And in public school area, we have our fantastic examples here in Menominee Falls School District, for example, where I'm a parent. My daughter is a student in Menominee Falls School District, where they are doing fantastic work. And just last week, they were hosting people from all over the country and from all over the state looking at, and I know you guys were there as well, to kind of see at the classroom level, at the school level, at the district level, how applying continuous improvement really improves education. And one thing that, for me, that really rings true in bringing these two sort of concepts together, continuous improvement and education, is that ultimately continuous improvement is about empowering people who do the work to own the quality of what they do. And it comes coupled with accountability. So it's ultimate empowerment of people who do the work with ultimate accountability, where they can actually do it and they can learn together, they can manage the work together, and they can be very proud of what they're accomplishing. So it's not anybody doing anything to anyone, it's people working together for the ultimate outcome of improving education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Larry.
Okay, Dean Henk, you look out and see family. I might see the Hatfields and the McCoys. I'm not sure. Milwaukee's a tough place. You asked the question when you invited me was, what should Milwaukee pursue? And I say we should all be devoted to public education. But that means we have a lot of hard work to meet the needs of all of our kids. But the problem I see is there are basically two strategies that are going on in the city, in the Milwaukee community. One says create a recovery school district, flood the market with charters, grow vouchers. To me, this strategy will leave us with two school systems, separate and unequal. One for 20,000 students and Milwaukee Public Schools for the remaining students. This is unacceptable. The second approach is to educate all students, align schools with communities, and fight for education along with policies that will serve communities and try to deal with reversing the inequality and the severe poverty that exists in this city that education alone cannot resolve. Education alone cannot resolve. Anybody that believes that is causing some real problems in the debate. And one of the things, to me, is how do you distinguish between these two approaches is who your friends are. Our friends tell us a lot about who we are. And those that want to expand privatization, want that to be the driving force, the friends are the Waltons. What do they do with their workers? The Koch brothers, the Tea Party, the Bradley Foundation, operators of hedge funds that want return on their investment. And where do these forces in our society, in our community, stand on what Pope Francis calls the fundamental issue of our time, ending inequality? They oppose workers' rights, they oppose women's rights, they oppose increasing the minimum wage. They do not speak up when there's an onslaught against basic voting rights in this community. And they hate unions, okay? People have the right to unionize. It's a democratic right. The other strategy is to connect to community, value teachers, and invest in communities. And also, actually, I'd be remiss if I didn't say we have to look at what's being taught in our schools. We're totally transparent in Milwaukee Public Schools. But I look at some of the things that are being taught in other schools that are receiving tax dollars, placing men above women, men are superior to women, homosexuality is a sin, even an abomination, anti-science, anti-evolution, yet public monies are going to allow these things to be taught. At one of the schools in Milwaukee, non-MPS school, we see glorified study halls called blended learning, where kids sit in front of computers for 2 hours a day to save money. To save money for what? To be sent out of state. It's time that mistruths about MPS, it's time that the mistruths about this whole dynamic, this whole atmosphere is laid on the table. I want I want people to look seriously at what's going on throughout this atmosphere of education. We have a number of MPS schools worth emulating, including the GE schools, which I hope that NADA addresses. We started with 10. We're expanding to a significant number of those schools that are very successful, seeing very clear progress. Our Montessori programs, we're growing our Montessori programs, our language immersion, IB, bilingual, we're very successful. If you want to look at the data, if you're data driven, you want to look at the data, we're doing some great work in our bilingual schools. Our STEM schools. Next week, we're sending 70 people, community and teachers, to the National Conference on Community Schools. So the issue is, people are committed in MPS to transforming our schools, to transforming what education should look like. So what I invite everyone to do is to roll up their sleeves and help us do the hard work to create quality schools. Thank you.
Just to echo comments, the introductory comments that Bill made, when I look around the room, I probably know half the people in this room at least, and I would guess a third of the room I've either had beers or coffee with at some point.
Probably beer.
Yeah, including our illustrious moderator. And so so I'm excited to be here and talk education. And to answer Paul Hill's question, who the hell would come to Wisconsin? It's people who love great food, who love great beer, who love really, really good, authentic people. And that's why I love this place. And when you look around the room, the great thing is this city is small enough for us to fix this. And that's important for everybody to understand. We are not an overwhelmingly huge city where we can't fix this problem. And so we launched Schools That Can Milwaukee 4 years ago. And our entire goal in launching Schools That Can Milwaukee is to really focus on a few things. One is the goal of closing the achievement gap in Milwaukee and fixing this problem and attacking that with some pretty specific strategies. And the other is that we have a crisis in our community and that we very often, in addition to some of the horrifying statistics we've seen in terms of school performance, we often attack each other across sector. And we really think that that is not helpful to solution finding. And so our goal is to create more avenues for collaboration across sectors where the very best school leaders in all sectors are working together to find solutions. And so our goal is to close the achievement gap for all children here. Our first milestone is to get to 20,000. We believe that will create a tipping point. Getting to 20,000 kids being served really well in all three sectors will be a significant achievement. And so how do we get there? One is by expanding and replicating those school leaders in all three sectors that are doing right by kids. And unfortunately, in all three sectors, there's a tendency to, when somebody is successful, to either look at them with skepticism or to sometimes attack them. And this is not something that's just endemic to within district dynamics. It's also true in the institutional church. At times when somebody's successful, rather than rallying around them and helping them expand their work, we're suspicious of what they're doing, and we tend to attack them, and we need to stop doing that. We need to expand and replicate those school leaders and those schools that are successful and grow more of them. We need to partner with high potential school leaders. This is Pathway 2 for us in all three sectors. And so we rally around the people who have the right commitment to kids, and there are lots of them in our community. We need to support those people, bring resources to the table for them, and help them to create additional high-performing, high-quality schools in our city. And then Pathway 3, we need to recruit talent to Milwaukee as much as we can to, again, lead schools in all three sectors. And our hope is, we just had a Grow in Milwaukee weekend in which we had 50 different candidates from across the country, and we had district HR people there, we had charter people there, we had choice people there. The whole theme is to try to get leaders to commit to Milwaukee and come here, rally around the movement, and close the achievement gap in our city. We believe it's possible, but we also believe that we need to work in a very cross-sector collaborative manner and rally around each other and help those individuals who are passionately committed to our kids and get this done together. We believe we're going to get there.
And Ruben.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. It's kind of funny to be an invited guest to your own hometown, but I am very honored and glad to be here. I got to say, I read the Journal Sentinel every day, even though it's usually the sports page first, so I know a little bit about the local context. But I think that I'm a bridge in some ways to the previous speakers and to this panel, because I have a little bit of an outside perspective, and I want to characterize what's going on in a different education narrative around the country, but also to talk about the work that's going on here that I know about as well. So Milwaukee, I think, with its great resources, its great neighborhoods, and its human and social capital, can learn a lot from how school districts, communities, families, parents, community-based organizations are working together collaboratively to develop shared vision, shared results, and shared accountability. And a lot of places are doing this through the community school strategy that I'll focus on. There are approximately 4,000 community schools around the country, and my organization, the Coalition for Community Schools, is working with 88 of these places that are working on community schools at scale. Places like Baltimore, Tulsa, Cincinnati, Oakland, Nashville, and New York. These places are all part of a growing movement that's mobilizing community resources to move the needle on the outcomes that we care about for both our students and for our families. Yes, that means achievement, certainly, but it also means moving the needle on factors such as health, parent involvement, school readiness, and overall child well-being. This is a growing movement, as I said. Larry mentioned it, but there's 70 people coming to Cincinnati from Milwaukee, teachers, educators, community leaders, to our national forum next week to join 1,300 people from all around the country, as far as Hawaii, to learn about how places are doing this. And they're coming to learn about effective community schools. A community school is a place and a set of partnerships that mobilize community resources. Together, schools and partners are creating and providing expanded learning opportunities, early childhood opportunities, after-school programs, relevant curriculum in college and career readiness, and much, much more. In a community school, there's very often a full-time community school coordinator who works with the principal hand in hand with educators, with families, to identify what the community needs, what the school needs, and to figure out which partners in the community, what assets in the community can be mobilized to meet those needs. These partners agree on a shared set of results. This is not just about wraparound services. This is about being accountable for results and being accountable for the results that are the core mission of the school, which is, of course, instruction. But it's part of that. It's part of developing that theory of action that was talked about at the previous panel. We know that we need to address some things outside of the classroom in order to improve what's going on inside the classroom. And we need community schools because the education reforms we have so far are necessary, but they're insufficient. We've been trying some of these things for a long time. I was looking at some data yesterday from Casey Foundation's Kids Count on poverty, and it said that the child poverty rate was 23% in the U.S. in 2011, and that's not a very interesting number, except that that's 16 million children. 16 million children, just to talk about the scale of our challenge. That's 1 out of every 4 children. Some will say that poverty is an excuse, that all kids can learn, and I completely agree that all kids can learn, but I disagree that poverty is an excuse. Rather, it's a reality that needs to be addressed very intentionally. And that's what community schools seek to do. Community schools help students learn. In Tulsa, a study from a few years ago found that high-performing community schools outperformed comparable schools on both reading and math by 32 and 19 percentage points respectively. In Cincinnati, where our national forum is going to be, they have become, since using the community school strategy, they call them community learning centers there because community schools are charter schools across the state, but they use the community school strategy. They've become the highest performing urban school district in Ohio. Places are doing this work at scale. When you think about what you can learn from other places, Oakland Unified School District has changed their motto to become community schools driving students. If that's not a clear theory of action, I don't know what is. And of course, when Arnie Duncan, our Secretary of Education, was in Chicago and he was the superintendent, he created what is now the largest community school initiative in the country. That's about 120 schools out of their 600. And in Baltimore, where your current superintendent is on his way, they've aligned their out-of-school time programming with their community school strategy because they've recognized that community schools are the vehicle for all these other programs. They help sustain the work and they help bring additional resources that make all the reforms that much better. They currently have 43 schools serving 19,000 students and are developing 22 new community schools. I think all of these places offer a lot to learn about.
Thank you, Ruben. So I'll mix up how I direct the questions. I'd start with Cole. I think this is a kind of a good question to lead it off. So in your Schools That Can Milwaukee role, you move between all 3 sectors, delivering education, the public, the charter, and choice. And based upon your experience, what seem to be the characteristics most commonly associated with successful urban schools regardless of the sector they represent?
So when I asked Susie Kirby, who's the principal of Wedgwood IB, what will define success for her, she said, until we get 100% of our kids proficient, we will not stop. We will not sleep. We will work hard to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And so what you have, and that's an example of really high expectations. And so, yes, high poverty schools, there's absolutely challenges related to poverty and what is happening in our communities because of that. But it doesn't need to be an either or. In other words, we can attack the problems of poverty, and we should, as a community and as an extended community, the metro area of Milwaukee, we should be attacking the problems of poverty aggressively. We also, though, at the same time, while we're doing that, need to continue to do right by our kids. It's not right to say, well, let's wait until poverty is addressed and then we'll get to education. That isn't fair, and it's not right to the students who are in schools right now. And so the schools that are most successful have really high expectations for kids in terms of what they can achieve and believe that all kids will learn and achieve at a high level. And they also combine that with really high levels of love and support. And so the same principal, Susie Kirby, if you visit her school, she's very bubbly and loving and knows all the kids and would do anything for her students. And when you combine those two things, and then underneath those things are all kinds of different behaviors that manifest themselves in the school, when you have relentlessly high expectations and relentlessly high levels of love and support, great things happen even in high poverty school populations.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists care to talk about what they've seen in schools that they've found to be successful? Larry.
One of the things that this distinction between poverty and teaching and learning in schools, poverty is no excuse. All kids can learn. There's no question about that. All kids can learn. But the issue is, are we going to intersect in a way that will raise up the whole city and their families at the same time that we are working very hard to educate kids? You can pose, if you want, to say that we can't wait for poverty to end, but We can't wait for inequality to be fought. We cannot wait for these the broad problems that face this community to be addressed, and they are not sufficiently being addressed. When's the last time we heard City Hall talk about inequality, talk about black unemployment on the north side? We don't hear that discussion. So at the same time that we're fighting for all of our kids, all 80,000 MPS students, we also have to be fighting as a community to turn around the conditions that are faced by people, and that basically comes down to jobs, family supporting jobs.
Ruben?
Yeah, I'll just say I think Cole's point about a both-and solution is exactly right. You can't, but the problem is that we haven't been doing both-and. We've been looking at for a silver bullet, and we're all guilty of it, and that's just hasn't worked. There isn't one. So we really need to start paying attention to a comprehensive set of solutions for what's really a very complex problem. And if we put family and community engagement, partnerships with community-based organizations, health, poverty at the bottom of the list, then they're just not going to get addressed because, frankly, we have a lot to do. But the resources are out there to get it all done. You mentioned that I taught in D.C. public schools, we did all the education reforms that were supposed to work. And we did well. My kids improved on their test scores. But anybody who's been in the classroom knows that's insufficient. The kids were still going to the homes that they were going to, living in the neighborhoods they were going to, may or may not have had a strong instructional leader the next year. We need, and our kids deserve, much, much more.
Thank you. Nada.
If I may add to that, I would say that if you look at the community and education in context and look at it as a system, it took us a long time to get where we are today. And it wasn't anyone's fault per se, right? It wasn't one organization or one group. So it's not going to be possible for one organization or one group of people to pull us out of this situation. So this is where what the work that Strive National is doing that really started in Cincinnati. And when I look at the example of Cincinnati, which is our sister GE city, GE Aviation is there, and we have a similar G Foundation grant with Cincinnati Public Schools, and in many regards, very similar in our engagement, is that until you organize the community, and the community really owns the outcomes. And by community, it doesn't mean that it's possible for one group of people or one person to say, what I'm doing is perfect, everybody else around me has to change. The idea is we all need to look at what we're doing collectively and how can we start trying to work together, to learn how to work together, to see sort of the practical reality of our world so that we can collectively organize to sort of push in the same direction to improve the outcomes. So this idea that it's just school districts or just higher ed or just economic development or just social services, it will take the collective impact and collective collaboration across the entire community. And I would also say, if you look at what's going on in the world right now, and I would bring an example of what's going on in Ukraine, for example, where in essence society, you were witnessing the birth of a civil society where people are engaged in their government and they are demanding the government to perform at a certain level. If you bring it back to our example, our community, our civil society, how do we look at the problems that we're facing and how do we organize ourselves and hold ourselves accountable and each other accountable for what's going to happen in our community? So it doesn't matter, at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter who is in charge of particular organizations. If we as a community organize ourselves and we as a community hold a very high standard for ourselves, whoever comes here to take any of the high posts will have the expectation and will know the expectation of this community holding ourselves and them accountable and doing what we can to not just being on sidelines, but being in the middle of the work to drive it forward.
Well, that's a really good segue to my next question for Larry, because we've talked about how important community is in all of this, but we've also talked about leadership at several different levels. And to be perfectly frank, what gave rise to this particular event was the news that Greg Thornton was leaving to go to Baltimore. And so Larry, as a school board member, now has the task with his colleagues on the board of identifying the next superintendent. And so my question, Larry, is what kinds of beliefs, skills, experiences, and so forth will the board be looking forward for as you move forward in your search for the next leader of MPS?
I kind of expected that question. Just to let people know, we are approaching having an interim, someone who's well acquainted with the district. We're talking to a few people, someone who's well acquainted to have an interim, because we want this process to be thorough. And so we're going to be looking at, and you can actually already go on, I believe, on the portal and see some of the of what we expect. We need somebody that can reach out broadly to the community, and that's one of the things that we laid out to Dr. Thornton when he first came here, and did some pretty amazing work in the business community and a variety of other communities. So that's imperative. But the other side of it is we have to have leadership that's can be that's vested in Milwaukee, can be connected to communities, and can identify how to intervene in our 170 schools when necessary. We need strong leadership. First of all, you have to have a strong principal. I have this debate with a lot of people, but I don't think you can sustain a strong program, a strong school without a strong principal. So we're in the process of doing significant training at the administrative level. And then, of course, you have to have a quality instructional program. And one of the things that we're putting a lot of emphasis on is professional development, and it's coming from a lot of different directions. So we have to have a superintendent that's vested in the community, two, that can deal with the broad issues, can build bridges. Many of us on the board have burnt bridges. We need somebody that can help, rebuild bridges, and somebody that can actually move the numbers on our students' performance, and it's very important. It's interesting that when Nada talks about the GE schools, because one of the GE, if they give you $20 million, they are in your life. Trust me, I don't know how many times we've gone around and negotiated with Nata and her team around exactly how we're going to implement and what should be done. They have an idea, and they work very hard to get there. And once we came to agreement, it has made a significant difference in our GE schools. And it's that kind of leadership that came from GE. Now, I'm not one to say that corporate America has the right idea for what we should be doing in our schools, but Nada and her team from General Electric do. So,
okay. Any other thoughts about the MPS superintendent? Because I do want to follow up what Larry said with Nada, but Cole or Ruben about the MPS superintendent?
I have a particular bias toward unifying the city. And so one of the things that Director Miller hit on in terms of bringing people together and finding solutions, I think is critical. And I do think somebody who has a track record of driving student achievement, because ultimately we've got to position our students for success as they exit school and head out into the world. And so the achievement side of things is really critical. But definitely where we're at right now as a city, we need to unify, we need to come together, and as I said, rally around the leaders within the schools that are getting the job done. So when Director Miller said the principalship is the key, that is absolutely one of our core beliefs and driving philosophies, that the leader in the school is the key to transformation. And so that's a major value of ours.
Okay.
I would just say I work for the Institute for Educational Leadership, and our tagline is leading across boundaries, and I think that speaks to the kind of leader that you should be looking for. It's somebody who can lead and build those bridges, and I think there are a lot of good examples. In the community school world, Mary Ronan, who's the superintendent in Cincinnati, has done an excellent job, has been there a while, and her work has been sustained because, in part, she has a strong partnership with the school board, which has passed the community school policy and supports in other ways, with the union, and there's actual work on the ground that they can rally around.
Okay. So we've alluded to the fact that if business is engaged with schools, they can be an ally, they can be an asset. On the other hand, sometimes educators operate from the assumption that business and industry have views that are very prescriptive, very intrusive. I've seen with what you've done, Nada, in Milwaukee Succeeds, and working with the networks there, that GE approaches this with I think, quite a different spirit. So I was wondering if you could talk about that work a little bit, and about sort of what we could do moving forward to make that relationship beneficial in ways for the children.
Thank you, Bill. I'll try to be precise and concise. There's so many things I want to say, and obviously we don't have time for this, but I would say any partnership has to be approached from the standpoint of we're here to bring what we have, the best of what we have, to bear, so that together we can look at the problem and figure out together how we can work on the problem. Any partnership, it doesn't even have to be business with education, any human friendships, business ventures, studying together, you have to have fundamental respect for the people who work and do the work every day and face the challenges every day. So from our standpoint, when we come in, we have tremendous expertise. We have world-class experts in quality, in HR, in IT, you name it, we have it. They're not experts in education, nor should they pretend to be. And then you have school district, or you have other educational organizations or community organizations who are expert in delivering their services, but they don't necessarily have the access to the level of expertise we do. So the idea is, how do we roll our sleeves up, and how do we say, let's start working on this project? What can we do together? And we bring our experts, and in the process, what happens, and I saw that transformation in our coaches who work in Milwaukee Succeeds. We basically have close to 20 coaches between GE, Rockwell, and ASQ, providing continuous improvement expertise to this strategy networks within Milwaukee Succeeds. And they're around early childhood, K-12, community supports in different spaces. I saw transformation in the degree of appreciation that coaches have in the challenges that people who deliver education every day face. And it becomes a quality partnership. It's not me telling you what to do. I don't have the answers. I have questions, I have particular expertise. And if we come together and we really focus on the outcomes, and we're really focused on the kids, and how can we improve, not focus on programs, but improve on practices, focus on practices. How can we work together to improve those practices, and then bring it up to systemic level? How can we look at the entire system and see where our biggest breaking points are, and how can we work together to improve them? I think it creates a sense of ownership, which just writing a check will never do. And it creates a sense of investment in the community, both from people who work in either private businesses, and it also creates a sense of support for teachers, for principals, for social workers, people who work in the system, that they're not alone in this fight, and everybody's looking at them and blaming them. They have partners coming in, working together every day, learning from each other, and building the connection that creates that necessary sort of movement to start moving the outcomes across the board. So I completely agree with Ruben, there are no silver bullets. But at the same time, we have the wealth of human talent right here in the city, and if we work together, we absolutely will move the outcomes for the kids.
One of the phrases that keeps recurring, not only in your speech, but everybody, is this notion of working together. And that this is a community issue that we have to address. And so I can vouch that Ruben reads our paper, because he wrote to me last night and mentioned something to me, which was Aaron Richards wrote yesterday about portfolio districts and community schools being one of the things that Milwaukee as a community ought to consider as a movement going forward. And she said it's not an easy thing to do. And I distinctly remember, I was either on a, maybe not so distinctly, I was either on a panel or something I read that Bob Peterson, the president of the Milwaukee Teacher Education Association, said he started to talk about community schools, and I knew a little bit about them from wraparound services and so forth before, but, and I thought, I love this concept, but easier said than done. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how easy or difficult it would be to implement community schools.
Sure. So community schools around the country happen and start a lot of different ways. Traditionally, historically, community schools have their roots in settlement house movement and outside of the school district places. But increasingly, school districts are starting to recognize that we need to do more to actually make a difference on student achievement and other indicators that we care about. We need to start paying attention to some of the other needs that our students and our families have. So I say that to say that it's about leadership. The E's is about leadership. If you have leaders, and not just one leader, that is developing shared leadership across sectors from multiple places, then it's a lot easier. So, but it does take time. It can take time. But any good reform that's going to last is going to take time. Otherwise, it'll be in and out in 3 years. You'll be on to your next superintendent, and it'll be gone. In Multnomah County, which is the county that Portland is in on the West Coast, they've been working on community schools for over 10 years. They've survived, I say survived, they've gone through 4 county commissioners, and somebody said that you don't run for office without supporting community schools now. So they have a much easier time, but they put the work in. At the school level, it does take some resources. I mentioned that you need to have it works best when there's a community school coordinator, somebody full-time who can help the principal coordinate the partnerships that provide the services and opportunities, both for learning and other, that children and families need. And that does take some additional resources, but there was a study that the Children's Aid Society in New York recently did. They operate about 18 community schools there, that found that there was a social return on investment. For every dollar they were spending in coordination and towards community schools, they were getting $10 to $15 back. So it takes a little bit of time, that's true, but it's an investment that lasts.
Thank you. Larry?
Yes. On this issue of working together.
Yes.
This school board has every intention of working with all of the forces in the community. The problem that we see, and I can't speak for every board member, but the majority I would think, says that whenever there's a move to try and work together, it ends up hurting the school district, the public school district. We put forward, the board president and the superintendent put forward an idea. Let's lobby together for increased funding for vouchers, for charters, and for public schools. Well, we get an increase. What does it result? We get an increase in funding for vouchers, but not an increase in funding for public schools. In fact, there's a decrease in funding for public schools. Mm-hmm. This is the outcome of us working together. To me, so what lesson do I learn from this? Do I extend an olive branch that will help fund other, two of the other groups, the charter and the voucher? On the issue of facilities, someone says we want MPS facilities. We have a plan for MPS facilities. We don't believe that you have a plan. We have a plan, and the board says, no, we're going to proceed with what we have planned. What does the other side do? They go to the Tea Party Republicans in Madison and lobby with them to try and take away our facilities. How can we work together under these circumstances? Mm-hmm. It puts us in a position where there can be no collaboration. We have to circle the wagons and fight for our 80,000 kids and for the educating all 80,000 kids in the city of Milwaukee. I don't know what else to do. I hear people say, why can't we all get along? But then when it comes down to the reality of working together, we end up losing, and our 80,000 kids end up losing.
Mm-hmm. There was a time ago when Greg Thornton, I think, was part of an op-ed piece that came out about Milwaukee Succeeds. And it was in this spirit of kind of working together. And my understanding was that he came under fire for that. There was another op-ed piece that followed it, and I think you might have been one of the.
I was one of the signers of the follow-up.
Could you say more about your concerns there?
That's exactly the issue that I spoke of.
Okay.
That op-ed, and one of the problems that we had on the board was there was no discussion. It represented the board, but there was no discussion with the board. We didn't know. Hadn't seen it till it showed up in the paper. So we straightened that out. I mean, things happen with boards and with in elected politics, but the essence of that op-ed was let's increase funding for all sectors, and I knew that was not going to be the case. Yeah. That again, it would be used by the other sectors at the cost of Milwaukee Public Schools. So we would give weight to them having increase in funds, and we would lose out. Okay. I'm not willing to do that. Yeah. I have yet to see the other sectors come to us. Schools of Ken might say, well, we're training people from all three sectors, but where is the real impetus for Milwaukee Public Schools not to circle the wagons and fight as hard as we can to increase the funding and do all the things necessary. By the way, we do a pretty good job of professional development. I see other people wanting to do PD with our teachers, but when I talk to our teachers that are in these other PDs, they say, we're getting a better play, better results from the PD that we do within Milwaukee Public Schools. Our superintendent, people may have criticism of a lot of things, but there's a lot of things that he did right and knew how to get done. Professional development is one of them. So it's we can talk about let's just all get along, but the realities of it are this school board has to decide how is it going to teach and instruct and fund what it takes to do that for 80,000 students.
Understood. Cool.
I just, I want to simplify things a little bit, excuse me. I want to simplify things a little bit, and Michael Casserly and Paul Hill were talking about Boston a little bit before, and the interesting thing that's happened in Boston, and Carol Johnson, the superintendent there, has looked at, so Boston has one of the highest performing charter sectors in the country, and rather than, in Carol Johnson's case, rather than looking at that and saying, oh no, this high-performing charter sector is taking market share from us, she flipped that and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to work with the high-performing charters in Boston. We're going to learn from them and make our schools better. And by making our schools better, our performance is going to increase and our market share is going to increase. And she's talked pretty openly about that. If we work and make our schools better, our market share will increase. And so she really looked at that collaboratively and said, if these charter schools over here are doing such a good job with kids, all right, let's go and learn from them. Let's learn from private schools, but let's learn from everybody we can to try to create traction in our own system. And that combined with the move by Massachusetts to really raise their state standards to the highest level in the country resulted in tremendous gains in student achievement. And so, again, I don't think we need to look at it as a hyper-competitive. I think it can be a both and. I think we can work together and focus on the people who are getting things done. I think we'd all agree, and Director Miller and I would agree with this, that Rob Rao, Milwaukee College Prep, they're doing great work. We should learn from Rob Rao, Milwaukee College Prep as much as we can and share the knowledge that's in those buildings across all sectors. And that may sound simple and naive, but it's not easy to create that kind of momentum, and that's what we're trying to do, is take what's working in buildings and help share that information, share that knowledge across all sectors, and help all the schools become better, focus on the high end, and help schools achieve for our kids. I would agree with that. The problem, I mean, many of those high-performing schools are MPS charters. And we work very hard to learn from their experience. We work very hard to do that. But that's different, okay? I defend our schools, whether they're instrumentality, non-instrumentality, whatever they might be. I defend our schools and I'm in the process of trying to help transform them. My problem is if our strategy for this city is to create two school systems, one for the 20,000, whether those are high-performing charters, vouchers, whatever, and the rest of the students are left to a different process. I think that is making a huge mistake. That's a strategic error in how we reform. That's not what I'm hearing from Cincinnati. That's not what I'm hearing from Boston. That's not what I'm hearing from places that have made progress. And I don't think that we should go there.
Mm-hmm. Then how would you respond to this notion of portfolio districts?
Well, one of the first time I ever heard that was the day the superintendent started work. We're going to continue to be a portfolio district. We have, within Milwaukee Public Schools, we've got about as many choices as you can possibly imagine. Okay, and we're trying to increase those. We're taking the high performing and trying to translate them to as many schools. As you said, this takes time. This is not a simple process, but we are a portfolio district, and we are trying to expand the positive results. I'm very connected to the Montessori community, and the Montessori community we have great success. 7 of our schools are Montessori. And we have plans to expand 2 more. And who knows what else will come out of that. That is the strategy that we're taking. But to see a strategy, for example, as expanding vouchers, which is what the state legislatures decided to do when, after a 23-year experiment, we finally get some data. Well, we're doing better than they are. Come on, give me a break. Why in the world would we expand something that is not showing absolutely clear results? It just doesn't make sense to me.
So we're going to open it up to audience questions in just a minute. I just want to make sure that that our panelists feel that they've had the opportunity to say what they would like. So about a minute apiece. Ruben, I know it's a kind of a nondescript question, but anything else that you, for the good of the group?
I love audience questions, so I'll defer my time for the audience.
We love this guy. Cole, anything else to add?
No, I just really believe that for too long we've been fighting and focusing on the hyper-political aspect of things rather than focusing on the people in each sector that deserve our support and deserve to be rallied around as a city. So,
okay. Larry?
Well, we're going to have a beer, not a coffee.
I think you need a beer.
We know each other. We've run across each other, and we have to talk. But I'll defer to the questions too, because I'm sure people have some hard questions. I've been most of the time.
No doubt. Nada, anything?
I love to hear the questions. The only thing I want to, as I'm listening to this conversation, and by the way, the rest of us are coming to your beer session. The first thing I learned in our change management class in GE about 10 years ago is that you can only move at the speed of trust.
Oh, I love that.
So
they're all writing this down.
And you know, Bill, this is something we run into Milwaukee Succeeds all the time, that at the end of the day, if we say we will do something, we will do our best to do it. And if for some reason we can't, we'll come out and we will look together at why it didn't work and be absolutely honest about it. And it's a very painful process.
Good indeed.
And another thing we learned in Milwaukee Succeeds, and the example you guys just had was this back and forth OPED, as long as we're working on quality measures and we're collaborating, it looks like a construction site. The second conversation turns to policy, it turns into a minefield. And I don't think there's a lot of appetite to even go there. So coming back to this trust issue, I think we have to figure out a way to start working together, even maybe on a small scale before we take it to a larger scale, and really focus to develop that trust. Because without that, it looks like we will keep coming back and we will have a tremendous loss of all this talent and all this energy and all these wonderful children who deserve much better than what they have right now. So somehow we have to figure out a way to just start working, just today, start working together and start building that trust.
Could we show our appreciation for the group up to this point? Okay, so now it's your turn. Are there questions? Sir.
I'm not a Milwaukee native nor a Wisconsinite. However, when it says what Milwaukee should pursue, how many in this room know that we in Milwaukee have to go to the state to change our parking? Now that's pole vaulting over mouse dropping. If that's all they've got to do with the legislature, why do we need the legislature? What we need is revenue sharing coming down from the state to us so that the school can, in fact, do what they're supposed to be doing, and that is teach our kids.
Okay. Okay, I think that was a statement, but it was a good one. Yeah, ma'am.
Larry, when you first started, I was, as a resident of the city of Milwaukee, a property owner. I was sort of very disappointed on your comments because you didn't seem to come up with solutions of how to really help Milwaukee succeed. You seem to be very angry, and you don't seem to be a person that comes up with solutions. So to me, that was very disappointing to hear that you are still angry and on the school board and working with our kids and setting policy for them to learn. So that was the first thing. The more I sort of heard you talk, it didn't change my thinking anymore. But I guess the one thing for me is not only am I a resident, but I'm also a business owner. So I need MPS graduates to graduate with skills so they can help me succeed in business. And if you don't understand that's why business people are really interested in what you're doing at MPS, then you really don't understand, I guess, the economy and how we need to succeed in this region. and what we need to have MPS really educate the kids and make sure they're graduating with degrees and with the knowledge so they can succeed not only for themselves, but help us succeed and grow the economy in Wisconsin. So I think your whole attitude towards business is wrong, because we need you to understand that we are in this together. And we do want to help MPS succeed. We want the students to succeed because we need them to help us succeed.
And is there a question?
So how do you work with business so we can achieve that goal?
Sure. I don't mean to disappoint you, but I am angry, and I wish more people were angry. If you read Lisa Delpit's book, Multiplication is for White Kids, the first thing she talks about in her book is why she's so angry across the country with the policies and what is happening to public education. My view towards apologize if I turn off the business community, one of the first things that we said to the superintendent is build close ties. Because I've been critical of the MMAC and its policies, doesn't mean I'm critical of those wonderful businesses that many are my friends and many that I work with. GE is a business. I've spent huge amounts of time with GE, Johnson Control, and small businesses. Partnerships at the schools that I taught at, I was the principal of. I support the business community. At the same time, I want the business community to support public education.
Thank you. How about some questions? Bruce.
Yes, one of the things that struck me, working with MPS is the importance of principals. That, often you'd see a really good school, the principal would retire, and then it was on a watch list in a few years. And so I wanted to ask about, how can we assure, and I'm particularly concerned about MPS in that way, how can we assure that, every school has strong leadership? And I'd turn it over, but I'd be interested in Cole's particular reactions, because I believe you're trying to get more MPS schools into your network there.
Mm-hmm. I think the last few years, we've seen, in terms of the sectors in Milwaukee, the most volatility is in the district sector, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think one is, whatever you think about the Walker reforms, and I'm sure this room is split on that, that caused a lot of volatility, because when you look at the district, when a principal retires, then that principal needs to be replaced by somebody else, and so there are a lot of moving pieces in terms of principals moving, principals retiring. And I think one of the biggest threats to the district as the traditional district system is the talent that's been leaving the district, and part of that is because of the Walker reforms and some of the issues with that. And part of it is, to be frank, the people management inside big systems. And again, when I talk about big systems, I'm not just talking about district systems or urban school districts across the country. You see this happen in larger systems like the institutional church, where people who are really talented, instead of people rallying around them and supporting them and saying, we're going to do everything we can to make sure you have what you need, and we value and we want you to stay here. That's not happening at the level it needs to happen, and that isn't about the school board or politics or anything. That's about managing people the right way, and we need to improve on that in our city, because the morale among district leaders, and again, I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of the Walker reforms, but I also think we have management issues we need to attack, and we need to value our best people, rally around them, and keep them in the district, and we haven't been doing that. And to me, that's one of the biggest threats that we have as a city and as a system. So,
I'd be curious, Ruben, for what you look for in the way of principals and leaders in the building of community schools.
Sure, I'll be brief because I know there's lots of questions, but I'll just say that when I talk to principals who have worked in a community school, they don't want to leave. And I know that Milwaukee is looking for talent. I've heard that a lot already. It's about growing the talent here that's local and also bringing the talent. Anyone who's taught or led in a school, you stay if the working conditions are right, if you're able to be successful, if you feel supported, if you have partnerships, and that goes for the teacher and that goes for the principal. And in places that are doing that, in community schools, other places that are doing school and community partnerships with district support, principals stay, and they are only increase their effectiveness over time. What we look for specifically, what you would look for in a principal is the same thing I mentioned before, a leader at the superintendent level, a leader who can work across boundaries, but who knows that that they can rely on their partners because there is that trust to handle some of the things that they just can't handle at that point. Doesn't mean they don't care about it and know it's important.
Okay. Other questions? Sir.
When you first started, there was a heavy emphasis on getting along with one another, and in the back of my mind is kind of singing Kumbaya. But after I listened to the dialogue, I'm seriously concerned that there isn't going to be Kumbaya, that you're not going to get along. So my question is, if you don't get along, what's your backup plan to improve things?
Anyone?
I'm very hopeful about the beer with Director Miller, or maybe multiple beers, but I'm very hopeful about that conversation.
There you go.
No one's going to stop working very hard at what they're doing. I'm not going to stop, and the principals and teachers in our district are not going to stop working very hard. We're at a level of collaboration never seen before between our teachers and the administration. And I asked the superintendent how many committees he had with teachers, and there were, he could count 12. And then I went to the teachers union and said, how many committees? They said, well, there's actually 18. And so there's all this work that's going on to drive forward teaching and learning. These aren't committees about other things. These are committees, and I just met last night with a group of MPS teachers around early childhood. This is what we're going to do. If we can change the environment overall in this city about how we look at changing inequality, and schooling is a subset of that, how we look at inequality and how we're going to deal with jobs. If we can start to do that, you'll see huge transfer. You'll see things happen, but I just don't know if that's possible at this time. I just don't know.
Scott, you had a question?
Yes. Thank you. It's to Larry. I've got a lot of things. I've called you millions of times, so now maybe I gotcha. I can talk to you here. But oh,
that's you.
Yeah, we got to call me. To this gentleman and to that lady's comments, I would think the people in the poorer communities should stand up to MPS and demand more, because if you if you think there's inequality in income, it's only because who's going to hire someone that can't read or write or doesn't have discipline. So I think the pathway is through education. Number two, there were 400 families that wanted to join or enroll in St. Marcus, which is a high-performing school. You and the board blocked it. 400 families are going to go back to mediocre schools. And then you come up with a cockeyed thing with this developer, Dennis Klein, to buy that school system, Malcolm X, and that's going to be a $70 million boondoggle taxpayers of Milwaukee. Please explain what you're doing.
First of all, that's just absolutely false. It is, for people, here again, this is the double speak that we get. People just say anything and it becomes the reality. That I refuse to accept that. I'm directly involved in that. We are putting an IB school in there. I've been planning on that for 2 years. You can call me, say it's not genuine, but that's your problem, not mine. I'm out here trying to create good schools. If they can't get one of our schools, go buy a private warehouse. They're a private institution. They are not a public institution. I am trying to expand, and by the way, you said those students will go back to mediocre schools. There's plenty of schools that aren't mediocre that they can go to. And so for people just to put us, see, once again, that's bashing MPS, saying that we're blocking the progress of high-performing schools. Come on, high-performing school. My wife said, don't bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up. The reading scores of St. Marcus overall from first grade to 8th grade is 21% proficiency. 21%. So how is that a high-performing school? The average for MPS is lower than that, but I have many high-performing schools whose proficiency is higher than that. So I can compete, we can compete with anybody at this time, but the issue is, are we going to do this for 80,000 kids?
What about the $70 million tax the taxpayers?
That's just false. There is no $70 million that we're taxing the taxpayers. That's just a false statement. And for anybody to take that out of this room would be the same thing as taking out that MPS gets $15,000 per child. These are just false things that get said about what goes on with the economy of Milwaukee Public Schools. But that's what that's what I have to live with. He says he's called me many times. Well, I get a lot of those calls. What can I say?
So, short of asking Cole to take out his referees sort of deal, we're winding up. We have about 2 minutes left. I think we could just take one more question. I've sort of not hit this side. Anybody over here with a question? Okay, well, I'm going to move this way. Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know, can you hear me? So what I'd like to say to Mr. Miller is, would you commit to sitting down with the leaders of, let's say, the top 15 high-performing schools, whether they're choice, private, or MPS, in the, the coming future, to discuss how we can move our city forward?
Yes, I would be glad to. Last year, President Bonds, president of the school board, went to the Bader Foundation. The leaders of the Bader Foundation said, we want to get to exactly what you said. We committed to it as a school board. The Bader Foundation came back to us and said they're not interested. Okay, I'm willing to do it. So you go out and get them. The Bader Foundation could not get them to come and talk with us to do exactly what you're talking about. I'll be glad to do it. I'll be glad to have that discussion.
Cole Knipple, can you make that happen?
Yeah, I'm happy to be a partner in that conversation and work to make that happen.
Sound like you're running for office. I just want you to know that.
Exactly. This is why I'm successful in officiating. I manage the tough situations. I will say, I actually feel compelled to say this because it's been thrown out a couple of times. For us, and it's just important for everybody in the room to understand, for us, the 20,000 is the 100,000. The 20,000 is the 100,000. So it's not, for us, getting to 20,000 is a first step. And I constantly try to put myself in the category of a younger generation leader because I want to be alive when we close the achievement gap in Milwaukee. And I believe we will. But it's one step toward all. And so that is one thing we agree on, is that we care passionately about all of the kids in Milwaukee. And when we have that beer, we'll talk about the 20,000 being the 100,000.
So the clock on the wall says our time has ended. Would you join me in thanking our panel? And also, thank you very much for your comments, for your questions, and for your attendance and participation. Have a good day.